Chapter 411, Professional and Amateur. These players were split into two different groups, which was unlike any party that headed out to grind. Players that left to grind would usually be in set teams, numbering at most 10 per team, yet there were way more than 10 in the two groups, with no two groups having more than a single player more than the other. These two groups noted the presence of one another, but did not bother to think too much about it, as both parties went about their own business and headed straight towards the city to sell off their loot. One of the two groups had returned to attempt to rob Gouffet, while the other consisted of members from Tanzanite Shade's Blue Umbra Guild. These men had all returned to Lin Chui City at the orders of their leader. They had not dared to make a move since Eternal Dominion was present, but they had finally gathered over 70 players for this. Eternal Dominion was rumored to be able to take on 20 people at once, but surely he was helpless against over 70 players, right? This was quite possibly the first time these people had to gather over 70 players just for one target. After investing so many of their men for this, the leader of this group of bandits had already sworn to obtain every single item off both Eternal Dominion and Gouffet until they were naked. Search the entire city for the two of them. Inform everyone once you catch sight of them, and proceed to corner them. The leader commanded, and everyone sprang into action. Over by Blue Umbra, they had a total of 750 players as a level 5 guild. It was a weekend afternoon, which was also one of the peak periods for users in the game, so there were almost 500 players online currently. Tanzanite Shade had every intention to acquire that Staff of Resurrection by any means necessary, so he decided to go all in and mobilize everyone for this task. There were already nearly 400 members of Blue Umbra making their way back to Lin Chui City. If the 70-man party led by that team of robbers could be called a criminal gang, Blue Umbra could be called a terrorist organization, instead. However, they were nevertheless still a guild, not a team of professional larcenists. Thus, Tanzanite Shade did not dare to directly order his men to target those men to drop their equipment, but instead told them how they were players who caused trouble in their bar and told everybody to search and slay those individuals in the city. Tanzanite Shade made sure to only inform those whom he trusted about picking up their dropped equipment. Nobody expected there would be players out there that would dare to act wildly by the bar. Everybody in Blue Umbra was riled up by Tanzanite Shade's inciting words as they began to form up in groups of 3s and 5s and search through the city. Southern Lone Blade is the leader of our target, and they have plenty of powerful players on their side. Everybody, do not jump the gun and attack them, make sure to inform me first, Tanzanite Shade exhorted them. They all knew their own limits. Upon hearing that their targets were experts, they knew that they would be no match for them, so everyone nodded in agreement. As for Tanzanite Shade himself, he had brought the trusted core members of his guild and formed a formidable team. The main force had already left to blockade the Priest Academy, and those left were prepared to drown Southern Lone Blade and his squad in their numerical superiority. The target was a priest. Tanzanite Shade was certain that said priest would not have any park points on him, so the chance for them to obtain that Staff of Resurrection on drop was really low. So the real work would be done over by the Priest Academy. Tanzanite Shade carefully thought through his plan once again, and felt that he had covered most of what he could think of. Even if those guys want to snatch this kill from me, what can they do against the whole sea of men from my guild? Since I'm already doing this, I may as well go the full distance and just target you guys as well, Tanzanite Shade thought to himself gleefully. He suddenly realized just how exciting it was to target someone for their dropped loot. He was even a little addicted to this thrill, despite not having looted a single thing, and he could barely even hold himself back from wanting to target more. The 7-man squad Southern Lone Blade led was currently strolling through the city, as he had yet to come up with a plan. The Video Mage and Eternal Dominion were both incredibly frightening targets to confront directly, and Southern Lone Blade was not confident just the 7 of them were enough to take them down. Having been the recipient of a seismic toss and a twin incineration from the duo, Southern Lone Blade had discovered that the damage from Eternal Dominion's seismic toss was not exactly disconcerting by itself, but that twin incineration was tremendously powerful. Fire Singed Clothes was ashamed when Southern Lone Blade asked Fire Singed Clothes his own damage, since the maximum damage he could deal with his twin incineration was entirely incomparable to that of video mages. Everybody shuddered at the thought of this. It was the mistake that everybody succumbed to when they first came into contact with Gu Fei. If his twin incineration was so strong, would his other spells be even more powerful? They had no idea that twin incineration was the strongest spell he had in his arsenal, and the other spells he had were much worse. It's difficult to deal with the two of them if they are working together. Our best option is to find some way to split them up, Southern Lone Blade said. The seven continued to walk around as they considered a possible solution to achieve this, unknowingly walking two whole streets as a result. They truly lived up to their name as the elites when it came to larceny. Having frequently done this job of theirs that drew the ire of others, their caution had already pervaded into every aspect of their lives. While a normal guild like Tanzanite Shades were totally amateurs when it came to spying upon their targets. As such, the seven men actually became aware of their act. "There's a thief behind us, possibly following us all this time," Blackwater said in the mercenary channel. All of them stopped in their tracks and turned back. There was no need to search, as that thief behind had immediately revealed himself when so flustered. He was far too unskilled when it came to the act of spying, so he was actually at a loss at what to do the moment he saw his targets were aware of his presence. The seven looked at one another. Just from this blunder alone, they could tell that the opponent they were now facing must surely not be anybody threatening. Southern Lone Blade wanted to step forward to find out more, but the moment he took that first step, the man immediately turned tail and ran. Glue arched his bow and was going to fire, but because there were simply too many other players walking along the street, he found it difficult to get a bead on the thief and could only watch as he slipped away. "Who was that?" The seven knitted their eyebrows. Southern Lone Blade's gaze fell onto Paddy Scent Pastures. Everybody immediately understood what this look meant. They were robbers themselves, after all, so they were quick to realize what was happening upon adopting a professional perspective. It was not that Southern Lone Blade had not considered there would be others that coveted the Staff of Resurrection. He had simply not expected that they would be so quick to strike. He had thought that this information would at least have to spread before requests to acquire it would come in. How could he have guessed that there was someone who fanned the flames of desire in Tanzanite Shade's heart, inducing the idea to pursue Southern Lone Blade so soon? "But that guy doesn't really seem like a professional," Blackwater commented. Southern Lone Blade nodded. The real professional, Southern Lone Blade, would truly worry about the future of this line of work from the standard that thief had shown when stalking them. The seven quickly came to the same conclusion from this: things would be a lot more troublesome if they are not professionals. There were specialists in every line of work, each with their own tricks of their trade. Professionals like Southern Lone Blade doing this work would often remember to keep a low profile. The more elite they were, the more low profile they would be. But for a bunch of amateurs attempting this job, would they even understand why there was a need to keep a low profile, or even how to keep a low profile at all? The opposite of being low profile would naturally be swaggering. And in MMOs, the only factor that qualified swaggering was having plenty of people. The seven men all lifted their heads and sure enough, spotted a huge crowd of players appearing in the street entrance ahead of them. That crowd's eyes were all trained on them, numbering over 100 of them. "Quick, flee!" The seven turned and bolted. Palatial Balefire. Fire Singed Clothes bellowed and activated his spell, and flames sprouted from the ground that blocked off the entire street. When the players on the street saw that a PvP battle was about to begin, many fled, while others stood by the side to watch the show. Fire Singed Clothes was chasing after the other 6 men after completing his cast. The members of Blue Umbra rushed right up to the flames of Palatial Balefire, unsure of the spell before them. A thief daringly attempted to charge through, but he actually disappeared with a sound of sputtering flames the moment he stepped into that wall of flames. Everybody was shocked, since none of them had expected the damage of the spell to be so huge. Beyond that wall and past the numerous players, there was no way for them to know where the 7-man squad had run off to. "Keep watch over here. Wait for this firewall to disappear before continuing. The rest, follow me." The leader of this pack of players assigned the slowest players to stay behind and keep watch as he personally led the faster players to circle around the other side. Southern Lone Blade and his comrades were rather experienced when it came to fleeing, seal the road and dive into the crowd, take the turn the moment they came to an intersection and they would easily lose their tail. But it was hard to tell if there would be players blocking their way up ahead. Which guild was that? Blackwater barked spitefully. Only a guild would be able to raise 100 players like this so easily. It seems to be Blue Umbra Guild. Glue had spotted the emblem those players were wearing upon their chests before everything turned chaotic. Southern Lone Blade was surprised. Wasn't that the same guild that owned that bar we caused a scene at? It must be. Fire Singed Clothes said. So it's those guys. Looks like they are gonna take this chance to target us for our equipment. So what do we do now? Everybody turned their gaze towards Southern Lone Blade. Perhaps most people would have thought that the safest method would be to log out. But from the perspective of larcenists, logging off would actually be the most dangerous choice here. There were probably players guarding the designated log-off points at the moment, and while the 7 of them might not have much trouble breaking through, that would nevertheless thoroughly reveal their tracks to their opponents. Southern Lone Blade and his men had staked out many log-off points throughout their career, lying in wait for their targets to show. Because too many players believed that logging off would be the safest move, they did not know that the moment they logged on again, a more intricately woven entanglement and subsequent hunt would be what awaited them. Of course, forcefully logging off where they were was almost foolproof, except that the game officials had already mentioned to the players that any such attempts would only result in the players going up against the system themselves. That was possibly the most dangerous situation for players to find themselves in, so none of the 7 even considered such an option. At the moment, what they had to do was escape the pursuit of Blue Umbra, as well as ensure their pursuers had no idea where they ended up. Let's leave Linshui City. After thinking for a bit, Southern Lone Blade finally grit his teeth and came to a decision. After the existence of their Staff of Resurrection was exposed, Southern Lone Blade had already contemplated fast-tracking his plan to leave Linshui City, yet had not expected he would have to do it so soon. About that video Mage. Let's leave it for now. When there is life, there is hope. Southern Lone Blade said. The 6 men all nodded in agreement. Let's go. The 7 made the decision and began to make their way through the streets and alleys. They opted for the narrow streets that were just wide enough for Fire Singed Clothes' palatial balefire to cordon off the way if the need arose. Drunk bro. Goofy had received the message on his end. Did you discover anything? Goofy replied. That Southern Lone Blade person, it looks like you're not the only one on the hunt for him. There's a lot of other players chasing after him as well. How many are there? I think I saw over 100 of them, at least. Oh, well, putting that aside, where is he currently? I'm on their tail, I'll send you their coordinates right now. The players from Blue Umbra were not adept when it came to stalking their target, but the men from Forever in Flowers could be considered experts themselves. Even though they were not a group of larcenists, they would often trail after ladies and chase after babes, and so this was a skill they excelled at, far more so than the larcenists. That was why the saying all roads lead to Rome rang true, be it chasing after skirts or engaging in larceny. It was useful to be skilled at stalking someone. Right now, this hunter from Sakurazaka Muni's mercenary group was very consummately shadowing the 7-man squad. Chapter 412, Caught in midst of battle. Goofy was kept updated with their coordinates even as he called Eternal Dominion. Quick, over here. You have news about their whereabouts? Eternal Dominion was naturally happy about this, since he was the one earning the money. Quick! Goofy shouted as he continued to weave through the streets. Poor Eternal Dominion had not allocated all his stat points to agility like Goofy, nor was his footwear comparable to Goofy's, so he was lagging behind quite obviously when they are sprinting like this. Why are you so slow? Goofy shouted back at Eternal Dominion, feeling quite accomplished. His usual combat partner was Felt Dancer, and she would always be the one leaving him behind to eat her dust, shouting those same words. Today, it was finally Goofy's turn to enjoy the sensation. Unfortunately, while the faster was able to slow down, the slowers had no means to speed up. No matter how much Goofy complained, all he could do was slow down and match Eternal Dominion's pace as the 2 men headed towards the coordinates they were given. This set of coordinates was naturally not just related to Goofy alone, but also Sakurazaka Muni and the entire mercenary group, the Great Hunting, over the mercenary channel. Everybody was rushing over, ready to lend a hand to Gu Fei. At the moment, it was like rumors were already flying all around Lin Shui City, as players would randomly see others sprinting by with their weapons unsheathed. Curious players were all inquiring, wondering just what was happening. The experts from Young Master's elites were dumbly waiting by the warriors' encampment. There was supposed to be 5 of them, but Brother Assist was actually not present, leaving just the 4 others. Why is Brother Assist gone for so long? Young Master Han glanced at the time as he watched several players rushing past him in a hurry. Looks like everything is about to begin. Ask Miles how things are on his end, Young Master Han ordered. The other 3 stared back at him. Ask him yourself. While Young Master Han was without a doubt their mercenary group leader, and they would listen to the man when it came down to his plans and strategies, they were nevertheless still experts. Of course they had their pride, and they were all unhappy with how Young Master Han would dictate orders to them like they were his secretaries. Young Master Han had no choice, but to ask Gu Fei himself, which only got him a single word reply, busy. That rascal's actually pretty efficient. He actually got everything in full swing so soon? Young Master Han muttered. Miles has already located Southern Lone Blade? War Without Wounds immediately stood up from the wall he had been squatting by the moment he heard this, lifting his weapon to the ready. Death was all that awaited their target once Gu Fei found him, so that meant their own fight was about to begin, as well. How is he so quick? The show hasn't even started yet. Young Master Han grumbled. He was still discontented over how quickly Gu Fei had located Southern Lone Blade. Forget about all that, let's get ready, everyone. Sword Demon pulled out his daggers and engaged his stealth right by the entrance. Any player that appeared in the designated safe zone would not be able to escape his sight. I'm getting into position as well. Royal Godclaw lugged his 3 bows and climbed up a nearby roof, locating a spot that would afford him a good angle to fire. What about me? War Without Wounds asked Young Master Han. Same as always, protect me, Young Master Han answered. Lin Shui City, 14th Street. Southern Lone Blade and his squad of men had arrived after circling through the back alleys. They had weaved through the streets along the way, feeling as if every single player they saw sprinting might possibly be targeting them, taking detours as necessary. What could have originally been a perfectly straight route wound and meandered across many streets instead, successfully avoiding those players from Blue Umbra that were after their heads thanks to their experience. The route the 7 had chosen was long and changed erratically, causing the hunter from Forever in Flowers to have quite a hard time keeping pace with them, and he was finally spotted by Southern Lone Blade and his men. They pretended to be unaware, taking a turn at a certain intersection before coming to a halt. That poor hunter had no idea what was coming, as he quickly gave chase the moment he saw his targets took a turn. In the end, Southern Lone Blade sent a sword cleaving down the moment he peeked his head round the corner. Even though his head was not chopped off, he nevertheless disappeared in a flash of white light. The hunter who had sacrificed himself had conscientiously reported his last coordinates before informing everybody that he had been discovered and subsequently killed off. Sorry bro. Gu Fei was truly conscience-stricken, but he had no idea what he should say. It was instead Sakurazaka Muni and his men who clamored as they gloated over their comrades' misery. This was the common spirit shared by every member in this mercenary group, which would have been termed a corporate culture if they were a real-life business. Don't worry about it. All the best, drunk bro, was the gracious reply that hoodlum gave, even as he personally addressed his own comrades' 18 generations worth of ancestors and descendants. Rest assured, I'll be sure to take him down. Gu Fei had also felt the only thing he could do at this point was to relate to the hunter how decisive he would be when slaying Southern Lone Blade, in an attempt to assuage the man on the value of his sacrifice. At the moment, Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion were not too far away from the last coordinates they were given. The 2 dashed onto the street opening ahead. Seeing that they had already gotten the abscissa correct, they turned to the right and immediately spotted Southern Lone Blade and his men as they were about to turn the corner. Over here. Eternal Dominion sounded almost cheerful as he bolted ahead, clearly not regarding this cruel hunt as anything. Just like Gu Fei, both martial practitioners figured this would be as easy as crushing an ant between their fingers. Gu Fei hefted his sword and was not a beat slower than the fighter. The squad had thought the dawn of hope would greet them the moment they dashed out of the street, yet they had not expected to be crashing into two meteors instead. They no longer dared to face them directly, so the only choice the 7 of them had left was to retreat. Palatial Balefire. Fire-singed clothes unleashed the same spell once more, as a flaming wall surged to cordon off the street. He was about to resume and run after his 6 comrades, but instead heard the 6 of them yell in unison, "Fuck!" Fire-singed clothes' palatial balefire may have blocked the 2 men from getting closer, but Gu Fei had also cast his electric wall to seal their escape. They had purposefully chosen narrow alleys and streets in order to maximize the effectiveness of fire-singed clothes' spell. Yet this came back to shoot them in the foot, since Gu Fei's electric wall had actually became the perfect counter. Considering the fame behind his name, no one dared to test out the prowess of Gu Fei's spell. That 7-man squad could only stay put, hoping that Gu Fei's electric wall would disappear before fire-singed clothes' palatial balefire did. Fuck! While the 6 men were staring at the electric wall, waiting for it to run its course, they heard fire-singed clothes curse loudly. They turned back and were dumbfounded by what they saw. That impregnable barrier came crumbling down in their hearts when they saw Gu Fei and Eternal Dominion easily make their way past it. Gu Fei utilized his blink with a raise of his finger, swishing into existence past the palatial balefire without losing a hair. Eternal Dominion got past the wall of flames in an even more outrageous manner. He ran up the slightly slanted wall that was a short step away from the palatial balefire and had parkoured his way up to the roof with ease. If even Gale Force could do this, there was no reason Eternal Dominion would not be able to. In fact, he did not even need to use the fighter skill Swallow Dropkick to get up there. Up on the roof and stepping past the spell, he leapt down to the ground in one go, conveniently utilizing his Swallow Dropkick to smash right down on his target, Southern Lone Blade. Southern Lone Blade's counterattack was not a pace slower, lifting his shield over his head and caused Eternal Dominion to slam his leg squarely onto that hunk of metal. Most ordinary players would probably have ended their attack with that, but Eternal Dominion was anything but an ordinary player's. With his foot on the shield, his follow-up move had already been unleashed. Still falling in midair, his other leg shot right out and landed on Southern Lone Blade's chest with deadly precision. That blow sent Southern Lone Blade back several steps, leaving Blackwater and the knight beside him to scramble to support the man. Southern Lone Blade turned back and could feel his heart tremble at the sight, and just 2 more steps and he would have found himself snared in Gu Fei's electric wall. Would he have died had he come into contact with it? Over on the other side of this encounter, Gu Fei had sent an opportune kick towards Fire-Singed Clothes the moment he blinked over and sent the man falling to the ground. Fire-Singed Clothes was lucky. Gu Fei only had enough mana for a single twin incineration after casting both his blink and electric wall. He planned to leave this move for Southern Lone Blade, so he did not slash out at Fire-Singed Clothes, otherwise the latter would probably be turned into dust had he chosen to feed that slash to him. At the very same moment, Eternal Dominion was sent bouncing after delivering that kick to Southern Lone Blade. Gu Fei whooshed past him and hurtled straight for Southern Lone Blade. Southern Lone Blade had only managed to find his feet moments ago. His thoughts were still stuck on his back foot that came so close to the electric wall when Gu Fei pounced upon him like a wolf on sheep. Southern Lone Blade was still leaning backwards at this time, with Blackwater on his left and the knight on his right holding him up. Such a posture would almost guarantee Gu Fei to score a triple kill with that one twin incineration brushing past them. The 3 wanted to defend themselves, but they had no idea if they could make it in time. Gu Fei had also thought he had this in the bag as well, when he suddenly realized the spot his front foot was about to step on was flashing a glaring red glow. Gu Fei's conditioned reflexes were indubitably formidable to be able to stop himself in time, despite hurtling himself forward with all his might. He jerked his torso forcefully in the opposite direction even as his body came sailing back. At the same time, a wall of raging flames shot forth from the ground. Gu Fei turned his head while in the air, and spotted Fire-Singed Clothes still sprawled on the ground, stubbornly raising that magic staff of his in the air. He had saved the lives of his 3 friends in the nick of time. Fire-Singed Clothes had no choice but to do this. He could tell that if he did not attempt such a move, there was simply no chance for Southern Lone Blade or the other 2 to resist that slash. But this one interception forced the 6 of them into a desperate situation, Being sandwiched between both the palatial balefire and electric wall like this had already limited the space they had. Gufei was a mage. At this rate, all he needed to do was toss an AO spell and they would have nowhere to run. But there was no use in worrying about this possibility. Now that everything had climaxed to this point, all they could do now was see how much damage could the video mage really dish out. This gamble from Fire Singed Clothes had unknowingly paid off, since it had actually snagged Gufei's Achilles heel. His AO damage was indeed not as scary as his twin Incineration in terms of its damage output, and he was only able to cast a single spell at this point. As well, would this be a descending wheel of flames or a blazing tree of 1,000 inferno? Fire Singed Clothes had his eyes glued to Gufei, hoping he could give his comrades the all-important hint to their enemy's next move. Yet, Eternal Dominion had also happened to land on the ground and was right beside him, casually dishing out a seismic toss as he reached the ground. Fire Singed Clothes was still sprawled on the ground when Eternal Dominion threw the man right into his own palatial balefire. The glow of the flames surged to the sky. Fire Singed Clothes was entirely unable to put up any sort of resistance as he was thrown into the blaze of his own making, instantly losing his life before he could even give any sort of hint to his comrades. Nevertheless, that hint of his became irrelevant with his death. This one toss that Eternal Dominion had done may have eliminated Fire Singed Clothes, but it was truly a huge failure in their cooperation. Had Sveltdancer or any other expert from Young Master's elites been in his place, they would surely have made the choice to step forth and help Gufei intercept the arrows fired by the archer Glue, allowing Gufei to successfully complete his incantation and bombard the 6 players before them to Kingdom Come. Not only was Gufei exposed to the archer's shots that prevented him from successfully casting his spell as a result of that one throw from Eternal Dominion, he had also caused Fire Singed Clothes' death, which meant the palatial balefire would instantly become harmless. There was no reason for the 6 veterans to miss such an opportunity now that it had presented itself, and they immediately dashed through the flames. Chapter 413, Fight. Continued to fight. Eternal Dominion had the ability to take on many at once, so there was usually no need for him to cooperate with anyone. Even if they engaged in group battles, most of his comrades were mainly fighters, so he essentially had no experience when it came to coordinating with other job classes. When Southern Lone Blade and the other 5 dashed out of the wall of flames, Eternal Dominion actually had no idea that this was the result of him tossing Fire Singed Clothes to his death. Now that Southern Lone Blade was able to get past that wall of flames, he hurtled straight towards Gufei. Their escape had already been cordoned off by the electric wall, so what other choice did he have, other than dashing forward? Southern Lone Blade charged, as Blackwater gripped his dagger tightly and circled around to Gufei's flank. Glue continued to pepper Gufei with his arrows to hamper the mage from making any moves, while the knight continuously bestowed blessings, casting his blessing of spirit on his squad mates that were engaging in combat, increasing their magic defense even as Patty sent pastures and the other priest kept their heels up on the rest of them, no matter if they had suffered any damage or otherwise. The 6 had no idea how many times they had drilled this formation, taking down countless of experts' various MMOs under their encirclement. Even Gufei could not afford to be careless as the 3 players that were attacking him coordinating flawlessly with one another. Unfortunately, it was Blackwater, who was attempting to ambush him on the left, that seemed to be just a beat slower. It was such a pity. Had the thief been quicker by that bit, I might really have no way to escape this formation, Gufei thought to himself as he darted over to his left. Almost at the same time, Southern Lone Blade forcefully halted his steps, cancelling his charge. The shield on his left hand reached out and shot towards Gufei's face, as the sword on his right came slashing in as well. Blackwater had also arrived, but his positioning was off so he could not use backstab or bludgeon. All he could do was a basic attack. It was still a stabbing attack, but Gufei did not have any trouble resolving it. The attackers had all positioned their attacks high, so all he needed to do was stoop low and unleash his twin Incineration. Just as Gufei was thinking this, he suddenly heard a loud cry from Eternal Dominion, "Incoming arrow!" Gufei was surprised to hear this, hurriedly twisting his body to the side as he heard the sound of rushing air that an arrow produced come flying from under Southern Lone Blade's shield. clipping the very corner of Gufei's clothes. That was close. Gufei broke out into cold sweat at this. He would have never expected that the flaw in this three-pronged assault of theirs had actually turned out to be a trap that they had rehearsed. After stepping into position, Southern Lone Blade had immediately punched his shield out in such a way that it blocked Gufei's line of sight. Neither Blackwater nor Southern Lone Blade were the ones that were meant to deal the killing blow. That troll had actually been relegated to glue. The two melee players had been nothing but a diversion to cover up this ploy of theirs. Had it not been for the warning from an onlooker, Gufei had no doubt he would have eaten that arrow in its entirety. But while Gufei may have managed to dodge this attack, he was now placed in a vulnerable position as this twist of his body sent him perfectly into Blackwater's attack. This allowed the thief to ruthlessly stab Gufei with his dagger, but thankfully it was just a basic attack, so the damage was nothing too alarming. When Gufei saw Southern Lone Blade raise his shield once more to cover his own face, he instantly realized how futile it would be to get entangled here and hurriedly retreated several steps in response. Gufei could see Eternal Dominion was already racing over to glue in an attempt to offer some sort of assistance. But the enemy they were facing was very strategic when it came to their tactical coordination. The knight had recklessly came forward in an attempt to block Eternal Dominion, and even though that man was soundly thrown out in 2 or 3 moves, it was the intent that counted. Had they not been facing this two immensely formidable kung fu duo, there was probably no chance Southern Lone Blade and his men would have lost here. After flinging that knight out of his way, Eternal Dominion rushed up to take on glue, but of course the archer was not foolish enough to take on Eternal Dominion in melee. He held the clear advantage when it came to movement speed compared to the fighter, so he immediately turned and ran. At the same time, Gufei's electric wall had finally ended, which opened up room for glue to dash ahead. However, his comrades were still locked in battle at the moment, so obviously he was not going to flee entirely. But if he was able to lure Eternal Dominion away and allow the rest of his squad mates to focus on Gufei alone, they just might have a chance to actually kill their target. Hence, he ran on and continued to fire his arrows at Eternal Dominion in an effort to provoke the man. Sadly, Eternal Dominion was resolute and firm. His only thought was to kill Southern Lone Blade and earn money, so he did not even bother when he saw Glue run away. More importantly, Glue's arrows were essentially no threat to him, so all he had to do was casually twist and weave to dodge the projectiles sailing towards him. Gufei was not even in the least bit disadvantaged even though he was facing 2 opponents at once, but he only had enough mana for a single twin incineration, so he had no desire to waste it and was searching for the perfect opportunity. Eternal Dominion had came over to grant him aid, while Patty Scent Pastures and the other priest risked their lives trying to obstruct him, which only resulted in Eternal Dominion casually sending them to eat dirt with a simple punch and kick. But one of the priests was persistent. He did not give up despite falling on the ground like that. His hands deftly shot out to grab onto Eternal Dominion's calves as he shouted at Glue, "Quick, shoot him!" Plenty of players argued about this method of PvPing, withstanding all the damage dealt while attempting to restrict the motion of the enemy. Real experts would not attempt to use such a method, but Southern Lone Blade's 7-man squad had no qualms about it. They did not care what method was used to obtain what they wanted, since the result was all that mattered. This was yet another huge oversight on Eternal Dominion's end as well. He had not expected that the enemy would be so lacking in character that they would use such a method to hold him down. Glue had already heard the cry and sent 2 arrows towards him. His snipe was currently on cooldown, so the skill he used this time was a double shot. That priest had no intentions of letting Eternal Dominion go, either. While he had been previously holding on to a single calf, he had already taken the opportunity to envelope both of Eternal Dominion's legs in a bear hug. Eternal Dominion did not bother to struggle, and in that moment when Glue's double shot arrived before him, his hands suddenly shot out one following the other, his hands closing as he caught both arrows in mid-flight. Twin Dragon's Clutching Pearl. Wondrous. Gufei commended him from his end. Twin Dragon's Clutching Pearl was not a technique that could be used to snare hidden weapons, but Eternal Dominion had managed to adapt it for arrows in this scenario, which Gufei had seen through it easily. This one cry from Gufei made Southern Lone Blade and the others feel a cool breeze in their hearts. This was especially true for that priest still hugging onto Eternal Dominion's legs. The man had originally thought that he would be able to earn some reprieve for the team through his reckless actions, Yet seeing that their opponents still had the time to leisurely survey the situation meant that even the concerted efforts of Blackwater and Southern Lone Blade were no threat to the video mage either, which really meant his act of trying to hold Eternal Dominion back by hugging his legs was pointless as well. Southern Lone Blade could immediately tell that defeat was almost a guarantee from the current situation they were in. They had no way to flee, since aside Blackwater and Glue, the other four simply did not have the movement speed to successfully get away. But having the two of them remain to sacrifice their lives with the rest was equally meaningless as well, so Southern Lone Blade made eye contact with Blackwater and signaled him to leave. Blackwater understood what Southern Lone Blade meant and did not hesitate for even a second as he turned to flee, waving towards Glue, who still wanted to fire another shot at Eternal Dominion. As he did so, Glue grit his teeth, casually releasing that knocked arrow before turning to run, fleeing as if they were preserving the flames of revolution they now represented. Southern Lone Blade was still worried that Goofy would attempt to stop Blackwater from fleeing, and had made the preparations necessary to obstruct him, yet he apparently had no interest in Blackwater's departure. Southern Lone Blade had already felt that the two of them seemed to be picking on him in particular, but he had no idea how accurate he was. It seemed like they only intended to kill him off and were not intending to trouble anyone else. Southern Lone Blade glanced behind him and saw that Eternal Dominion had already gotten away from the priest. Realizing that the man was also ignoring the other players as he dashed right towards him, he made eye contact with the others and signaled them to retreat as well. Southern Lone Blade decided he would persevere for a bit longer so as to increase the chances of survival for the rest of his brothers. Unfortunately, that fantasy of his was nothing but a mirage. Who could even survive a single attack, now that Goofy and Eternal Dominion were working together? Blocking the sword in front of him with his shield exposed his back to Eternal Dominion, which allowed the fighter to close in and get a hold on Southern Lone Blade and execute his seismic toss swiftly. Southern Lone Blade was depressed. Just kill me then, but why must you do it in the same manner? Goofy was about to step forward and lash out with his twin incineration when his ears suddenly picked up the sound of a number of arrows sailing through the air. He did not even spare the time to turn back and look as he quickly retreated from where he stood. Eternal Dominion had also twisted and twirled his body to evade the incoming projectiles. Turning his head to the side, Goofy saw a whole bunch of players standing by the street entrance pointing at him as they roared, "Over here!" At the same time, homing projectiles from the archers came soaring through the sky like rain. Wheels of flames filled the sky as blazing trees of inferno began to erupt from the ground. Goofy flurried his sword to bat the arrows away, even as he ducked and evaded spells coming for them. Eternal Dominion did the same as well, except he was far more debonair, leaping to climb the wall as he used the flat surface to elevate himself further before making it up to the roof with a swallow drop kick. Southern Lone Blade had also raised his shield up above his head as well, even as he cursed in his heart, "These guys are truly unrelenting when they strike." He recognized some of these players. He had hoped to use these players to increase Goofy's park value back over in the warriors' encampment, but they ended up backing out in cowardice. Upon realizing the prowess the mage and fighter duo possessed, they did not act reckless. Instead, they gathered more of their men before they attacked in earnest, finally locating Goofy at this crucial moment. Their appearance had essentially saved Southern Lone Blade, but he was not in the least bit thankful. These guys had tossed out their AO attacks indiscriminately where Goofy stood, completely disregarding the fact that Southern Lone Blade was going to be caught in the crosshairs as well if all their spells connected. The knight and the two priests were originally prepared to beat a retreat, but this sudden change stopped the three men in their tracks once more, hurrying to come to Southern Lone Blade's aid. The knight tossed out his holy healing, while the heals from the two priests swathed their leader. Southern Lone Blade was slow to react, but with the help from his comrades, he managed to survive and step out from that raging firestorm with his shield held above his head. But before he could even heave a sigh of relief, a fiery glow descended upon him once more. Why would Goofy let his target off so easily like this? Since the man had escaped in the same direction as he did and was just a mere step away right now, Goofy saw no reason not to let his twin incineration flash out fearsomely. Southern Lone Blade subconsciously wielded his shield and blocked the strike. Had this been under normal circumstances, Goofy could have easily modified his attack to thread his blade past the shield and activated his spell after, but he was not given the chance to change it as the newcomers in that street entrance had continued to close in and kept up their attacks, which were all targeting Gufei. Gufei was not so heroic as to sacrifice his own life just to kill Southern Lone Blade like this, so the moment his sword came slashing at Southern Lone Blade's shield, he shouted out the word incinerate and activated his spell. Seeing that Southern Lone Blade had stepped out from the firestorm, Gufei had hoped that his HP were not enough to survive this blow of his. But unfortunately for him, that hope of his was not fulfilled, as the skills of Southern Lone Blade's comrades were the real deal. The combined healing managed to ensure Southern Lone Blade hung on to his life, while he continued to advance after taking Gufei's sword with his shield. Meanwhile, Gufei had instead been caught in that wave of arrows and spells coming his way. Eternal! Gufei cried out. He had his hands full just dealing with what he had on his plate, so he could only hope Eternal Dominion would be able to take down Southern Lone Blade by himself. However, it was apparent that Eternal Dominion simply had not faced enough large-scale battles. At the moment, he was safely standing up on the roof, yet he had no idea whether he should help by first dealing with the horde of enemies that had appeared, or continue their hunt for Southern Lone Blade. Hearing Gufei shout his name, he quickly shouted back his reply, "What?" Chapter 414, Split Up and Escape. That what was a response that Eternal Dominion gave subconsciously. Naturally, he would look over when Gufei shouted at him, and the first thing that he registered was how busy Gufei was, as he tried to resist under that heavy assault. Of course Gufei was hard pressed. Had he been able to get the situation under control, then he would naturally have been able to take care of Southern Lone Blade by himself. Eternal Dominion spied the fleeing Southern Lone Blade at the same time he looked over at Gufei, and quickly realized what he needed to do as he began to give chase while still upon the roof. Eternal Dominion had not skimped in adding points towards agility, so his movement speed was much quicker than Southern Lone Blade and the others. It did not take him long to catch up as he took a big step, leaping off the roof and landing on the ground. But Southern Lone Blade was already watching as Eternal Dominion chased after them and had already planned his response. The moment he saw the shadow from the roof blur and Eternal Dominion just about to land, Southern Lone Blade stepped forward, extended both his arms and unleashed the ultimate kill move in a warrior's arsenal, Cyclone. Even Gufei had suffered when facing this skill, especially since the dual-wielding Berserker job class advancement became accessible to the players. A dual-wielding Cyclone was as good as a normal Cyclone that spun twice as fast, and Gufei simply did not dare to say with confidence that he would be able to take it head-on. Eternal Dominion was in midair at the moment, and an unarmed fighter had no weapon that could utilize the same technique that Gufei often used against the skill. Gufei felt Eternal Dominion was in a worse situation than he might have been when he looked back. He watched as Eternal Dominion rubbed his palms together and shot out a single bear bomb, right into the windy torrent that Cyclone created. Could he be hoping to grab onto Southern Lone Blade's claymore as he spun? Gufei knew that a fighter could equip and use sparring gloves, so it might not be too big an issue for their hands to collide with an enemy's claymore. But the problem was that there was bound to be a substantial disparity between the strength of both parties. Even if he managed to grab onto the claymore, there was no way the strength that Eternal Dominion had as a fighter could compete with that a warrior possessed, much less be able to interrupt Southern Lone Blade's Cyclone. At that point, Eternal Dominion would just be tossed in the air by the Cyclone. Would that not be even more crushing than being hit by the Cyclone? Gufei thought as both parties collided. The palm that Eternal Dominion thrusted out connected with Southern Lone Blade's Cyclone. In that instant, his palm burst out something that shimmered like a globule of water about the size of a wash basin. The moment the claymore cut through that globule of water, it broke and expanded into a mist that was left suspended in the air. Eternal Dominion was also thrown out in a trajectory that formed a perfect arc, flying past the roof and landing in the next street over. Southern Lone Blade was also slightly stupefied by this reaction. But this was not a good time to be thinking over the matter, so he quickly ended his skill and hurried to flee with his 3 comrades. He turned back and caught a glimpse of Gufei back there still being harassed to no end by those small-time crooks, too busy to notice where they had gone. Only then did Southern Lone Blade finally heave a sigh of relief. Southern Lone Blade was certain that Eternal Dominion must have activated a skill when he thrust his palm out like he did. He had never seen that skill before, but he was willing to venture a guess that it should have been the first skill a level 40 fighter would learn the moment they advanced to a Qigong master, Shockwave Shield. There were not many fighters in Parallel World to begin with, and there were a minute amount among those that were high level, with even fewer that chose to advance to a Qigong master. That was because the other option for advancement for fighters was to be a brawler, which ran in line with the mindset of enhancing the combo features that fighters had. Their main focus was utilizing speed to melee their enemies swiftly, which clearly meant a lot more striking, making it the more popular option. What people knew with regards to the Qigong Master option was largely confined to the official information released, and was not something Southern Lone Blade had personally come in contact with. He had not expected that the leading fighter, Eternal Dominion, had actually chosen to walk the path of the Qigong Master. By the looks of things, it looked as if, of the original 5 unyielding experts, 3 of them had actually taken the road less traveled. Even though the officials had claimed that each and every job class advancement was unique and equally balanced, the fact it was balanced would not change the player's own preferences. The choice to advance into a sharpshooter as an archer, or the assassin as a thief, berserker as the warrior, the brawler as the fighter, these were all advancements that were far more offensive than the other option they were given. Most players liked these sorts of job classes, so there were clearly more people out there who leaned towards them. But out of the original 5 unyielding experts, Svelte Dancer had chosen to be a rogue, Deep Waters had opted to be a hunter, and Eternal Dominion's Qigong Master were all choices that went against the grain. Southern Lone Blade could not help but think of Gu Fei, who despite not being among the 5 unyielding experts, was evidently someone who was even more powerful than the 5, and yet another player that had also chosen to be the less popular Lightning Mage. Motherfuckers. They are all hipsters. Southern Lone Blade cursed them all viciously even as he kept on running. He had finally gotten away from the mess by this point, so he immediately sent a message to the previously deceased Flame-Singed Clothes, as well as Blackwater and Glue who had fled earlier. Even though they had quite the hard time fending off the 2 men after them, he felt rather encouraged that they had only lost 1 out of their 7-man squad. Singed, what's your status? Southern Lone Blade asked Flame-Singed Clothes. While the battle before was complex and had plenty of changes, the fact was that it had only taken 2 to 3 minutes, and Flame-Singed Clothes had only revived back in the Mage Academy moments ago. After observing the situation around him in detail, he reported, I'm in the Mage Academy, and there are indeed quite a lot of enemies positioned around. But they are not in overwhelming numbers. No one really seemed to care when I walked out of the spawn point. Then you should continue on your own. We'll meet at these coordinates outside the city. After Southern Lone Blade sent the message and coordinates over, he turned to regard the other 5 companions with him. We're gonna split up as well. Split up? Patty St. Pastures was in shock. He was just a priest, so there was no way he could defend himself if he was on his own. Southern Lone Blade nodded. Fuck, I should have thought of this sooner. Moving out in a group like this is far too eye-catching, which was why it was so easy for the enemy to notice us. The targets on our back will be a lot smaller if we move by ourselves, and it will also be much easier to escape if people are hunting us. The 5 instantly realized what he meant, and understood the reasoning. Actually, their enemies would not be able to recognize all of them. The only reason they had drawn their attention was entirely because of how conspicuous they were when moving as a group. Let's split up and make our way out of the city. Here's the coordinates to gather at, Southern Lone Blade said. The 5 men nodded. You two, be extra careful. Southern Lone Blade final words were for Patty St. Pastures and the other priest. It was clear that their identities and lack of ability meant they would be in far greater danger using this method, so they would be the ones bearing the greatest pressure now that they were splitting up. However, neither priest had any input on this. Although there was a good sense of brotherhood in the squad, none of them ever saw the need to share a mentality of one for all and all for one. Their focus had always been about obtaining the biggest rewards or minimizing losses. You take care as well. The 2 priests gave the same well wishes to Southern Lone Blade. The risk that he had to bear was realistically no less than theirs, since the people on his trail were quite possibly the 2 strongest players currently in the game. Everybody said their goodbyes, and set off to find their own way to the meeting point. Back in Linshui City's 14th Street, Gu Fei was still embroiled in a battle that had yet to end. Southern Lone Blade and the others had successfully escaped, while Eternal Dominion had been thrown into the other street and it was unknown if he had survived. Gu Fei had run out of mana and was feeling immense pressure from having to deal with so many enemies alone. Arrows continued to hound him even as the skies filled with spells endlessly. Were it not for the fact the Mage had a limited range capability, his enemies would have filled the entire street with flames. But the level at which they were constantly casting spells around Gu Fei was already enough to lock him down and prevent him from retreating. They were experienced, as their spells continued to land right behind Gu Fei one after another. If Gu Fei wanted to hide or escape, he would have to step into the AO bombardment area that the enemy had prepared for him. At the moment, in order to evade the enemy spells, Gu Fei could only take the initiative to close in on them. Nevertheless, he was very certain that while there was space for him to step forward and evade those attacks, the enemy would be able to align their AO spells in a manner in which they could all be cast at once the moment he was close enough. He would no longer have anywhere left to hide from that assault, unless the enemy happened to have a bunch of mages that had whimsical spell control, like the ladies from Amethyst Rebirth. But that was entirely unrealistic, of course. Since these people were bandits and robbers, it was more likely they would be much more fierce and aggressive. Unable to retreat and with nowhere to hide, the only option Gu Fei had left was to attack. That saved him the trouble of thinking too much about things as he immediately sped up, wielding his moonlit nightfalls as he dove straight towards the enemy's formation. The interlopers were extremely surprised by this. They had not thought that their target would still be so unrestrained, despite being by himself, being so bold as to run headlong into their ranks, especially since he was just a mere mage. "Mages, get ready!" the leader bellowed. He had been waiting for this chance to take down Gu Fei in one move. All the mages lifted their magic staves, some pointing up in the air while others pointed to the ground. Yet, Gu Fei seemed to have heard the command himself as he raised his sword towards the sky, whirling the blade as sparks flew the moment the incoming arrows made contact with him. "Watch the range." "Release," the leader commanded, and all the mages started their respective incantations. Meanwhile, Gu Fei had also called upon a spell at the same moment, Thunderbolt, using the very last bits of mana he still had. A single streak of lightning came crashing down from the sky. Lightning affinity spells were always the first to be cast. A blue light arced and flashed through the sky, even as a mage in the enemy's formation raised his magic staff, a pose that looked as if he was calling that bolt of lightning onto himself. The spell connected and the mage was left blackened, yet he was actually still alive. Gu Fei was extremely shocked by this outcome, but then he remembered that he was wearing his flaming robe, not his midnight spirit robe. By this time, the enemy mages had already completed their incantations successfully. The sky above the entire street glowed red, with only a single patch of blue sky remaining visible, where that mage must have been casting. Gu Fei made his way into that spot. Even though he still had a blazing tree of 1,000 infernos beneath his feet, most mages were unable to insta-kill anybody with just that skill alone. Even if there was someone out there that could, it might not necessarily kill Gu Fei, since he had the Windchaser's blessing on his neck. Just that item alone gave him twice the amount of HP of an average mage. Gu Fei, who usually thought the amount of HP he had was unimportant, could not help but feel a sense of security knowing he had such a piece of equipment on him. Gu Fei was now near the enemy, and the front row of their formation consisted entirely of archers, who quickly dodged to the side the moment they saw him closing in. Gu Fei slashed to left and right, with flames and lightning occasionally bursting out from his falling blade. He was not looking to slay these players, as his goal at the moment was merely to escape from the quagmire he was in. Behind the archers were the mages. Gu Fei leveraged on the fact that he had more strength than the average mage to execute his kung fu technique, the deft touch of 18 trips. 2 mages had already been pummeled down to the ground, even as the other mages scattered to the sides chaotically. Just like the archers, the mages were in disarray the moment they were engaged in close combat. Behind them were the warriors, thieves, and other job classes that had not had a chance to contribute a single thing in this battle. Close quarters combat was their main focus, and Gu Fei knew that the difficult part of this encirclement had just begun. A thief was the first to tear straight for him, and Gu Fei stabbed his sword out to greet him. There was no doubt that the blow would connect, But the issue was that the damage he could deal was not enough to even pressure the enemy. Seeing the heavily armored warriors right behind, Gu Fei felt that it might be a little difficult to break through the barricade of players in this narrow street they were now in. Thus, he did not recklessly charge ahead, opting instead to quickly retreat and bury himself back with the mages and archers. Gu Fei thought to himself, I think it's still best if I bully these guys first, before I take things as I go. Chapter 415. Let you be inspiring. For a bit this gang of robbers were extremely depressed. They had not expected to find themselves in such a situation. Players that had never really crossed blades with Gu Fei would never know just how terrifying it was to contend with him. Most people thought he was a mage that had spells that could insta-kill targets, but that assessment alone would be an insult to Gu Fei. Just take the current situation, as an example. He was a mage that had run out of mana, yet he was still able to throw the entire party into a chaotic mess. That was something nobody could replicate. Gu Fei shuttled between the mages and archers as he bullied them without mercy, making sure to keep a half-meter distance from them from moment to moment. It was quite a despicable tactic. Some of the archers had already managed to get away, but whenever they tried to fire their arrows back in, Gu Fei would dodge and the shot fired would end up shafting one of their own. Gu Fei would casually bat the arrows away if they used homing projectiles, and given how there was quite a bit of cooldown to the skill, they were unable to use it again for a short while. At the start, Gu Fei was rather ruthless with his attacks, and his constant attacks had even managed to kill off a mage. But he soon discovered that these mages actually made for really good meat shields. Mages were usually not very agile, which made it easy for Gu Fei to run circles around them. So, whenever warriors or thieves managed to squeeze their way in, they were never able to find the right opportunity to strike. Whenever a thief wanted to score a backstab on him, they would always find Gu Fei with another mage behind him. And if the warrior wanted to use charge or cyclone, someone tried that and it turned out just like the archers. The moment Gu Fei dodged it, they would end up hurting their own instead. Disperse! Mages, get away from one another! The gang leader shouted out in panic. But they were stuck in that cramped street, with walls flanking either side. Where could they disperse to? Gu Fei had already accurately homed in on this issue and was currently utilizing the terrain advantage as best as he could. But even so, under the protection of the warriors, thieves, and other classes, the mages were slowly able to shift themselves to the back. These melee job classes had been playing a game of cat and mouse with Gu Fei for quite a long time, and he already knew he was no match for them. Upon seeing that they were about to bear down on him in close combat, roaring as they came rushing towards Gu Fei, the man simply turned his head and fled. There were archers ahead of him, but when they saw Gu Fei running straight towards them, each of them was actually so unsettled that they did not dare to fire their arrows at him. Why was that? It was entirely because Gu Fei was no ordinary player. They had already noted how this mage was absolutely capable of dodging the arrows they shot at him. Firing off arrows that missed Gu Fei was nothing, but now that their own comrades were right behind Gu Fei, arrows they fired at this point would only become friendly fire if Gu Fei dodged them. At the end of the day, the manpower that this gang of robbers had mustered did not reach the critical mass needed to endanger Gu Fei. Their archers, mages and such only numbered slightly over a dozen. Had they possessed several dozen of them in their ranks, Gu Fei would most likely have been burned to ash from the total firepower of their mages or already became skewered like a hornet's nest under the barrage of arrows from the archers. Stop him! The gang leader angrily shouted, when he saw how useless his archers were, standing about doing nothing. The archers stared at their boss as he gave the order. Thinking that since their leader had essentially given the green light to shoot their own, they immediately obliged and daringly released their arrows. Thus, Gu Fei dodged and batted the arrows that came flying towards him, leaving him unscathed while the thieves behind him howled and complained, their curses rising in volume as they sustained damage. Stop squabbling! The gang leader realized that order he had given had been a mistake and was feeling miserable. Surround that guy! The leader realized asking the archers to stop him was rather pointless. He may as well be more specific with his instructions. The street was only so wide, it should not be too much trouble for the archers to line up in a row and hold Gu Fei in place. After hearing that cry, Gufei was also quite anxious on his end. He hurried to adjust his pace as he strafed towards the wall. The enemy had no idea what Gufei was intending to do as he stuck near the wall and ran. Some of the archers diagonally opposite him even dared to fire their arrows at him. The wall was right beside him, so there was no chance of friendly fire. In the end, just as Gufei was about to run right into the row of archers, the two players he was running right into were already reaching out their arms in attempt to grab hold of him when Gufei suddenly kicked at the wall beside him. Gufei did not have enough strength to send himself flying up towards the roof like Eternal Dominion did, but he was able to use the kick to bolster his jump a little higher. Next, he used his hand to get support from the wall as his other foot stepped onto the shoulder of the archer before him, easily getting over the wall the players had formed. The archers exclaimed as they turned around, but Gufei had already landed and run off a good 3 meters. None of their men were anywhere ahead, so the archers hurried to fire arrows at their target even as their leader angrily called for their mages to attack. But had all the preparatory work Gufei had previously done been for naught? The mages had long since shifted to the back of the mob, so now that they were suddenly required to move up to the front created a scene of chaos that Gufei capitalized on, and he managed to get far away. There was no way for the mages to block his way through a spell bombardment anymore. Chase him! The leader roared angrily. Gufei did not look in the least bit cool when he made his escape. He knew that his death was an eventuality if the battle dragged on any longer, so he quickly fled after disrupting the enemy's formation. He was quite literally running for his life, not even caring to evade the arrows that sailed after him. In fact, an arrow had already embedded itself into his shoulder as he ran. The archers were still chasing after him with their arrows, and Gufei was not even certain if his HP would be slowly whittled down if this went on any longer. But the intersection was already right ahead, so all he needed to do was sprint over to take the turn and his chances of survival would surely increase tremendously. It was just at this moment when Gufei spied a head pop out from the corner and shrank back quickly. Don't tell me there's an ambush there. Gufei's heart seized up as he momentarily feared to get too close to it. He made his way to the middle of the street in a few strides and finally reached the intersection. Gufei turned his head to look, hoping to be able to tell if there was an ambush laying in wait for him before making the decision. In the end, all he saw was a group of extremely reprehensible-looking men prone behind the wall, each of them looking shifty. The moment Gufei dashed into view, he saw all these men jerk their heads towards him before revealing a look of pleasant surprise. "Drunk bro, come over quick!" someone shouted. Gufei was no longer tense like before, since he had recognized these men as the members of Forever in Flowers. He quickly darted into the alley with them as Sakura Sakamuni waved, "Brothers, it's time for us to enter the fray." In the next moment, all Gufei saw was these guys lackadaisically get up from the ground as they gleefully lifted their bows at the ready and leapt out from the street together. "Fire!" Sakura Sakamuni shouted. "Fire!" The rest of the players echoed, with some even despicable whistling as they did so. Gufei felt a little embarrassed to mix around with this lot, before looking at the Lady Vastlushness standing by the side, looking calm and composed. A habit that becomes naturalized, that's a saying all right, Gufei thought to himself. Those archers from that gang of robbers had recklessly rushed forward after their quarry with their bows raised at shoulder level, looking like they were a SWAT team ready to apprehend a fugitive. In the end, they had not expected that the moment Gufei turned the corner, several players would leap out and take his place instead. "It's an ambush!" the archers yelled, even as arrows rained upon them. Forever in Flowers consisted of mostly archers. Fireball was among them hoping to toss out a spell, but his disorderly and undisciplined comrades ended up bumping into him all over the place, not giving him a single chance to complete his spell incantation successfully. Even though it was an utter mess, fighting in this sort of narrow street only helped to amplify the lethality of the volley of arrows these 40 archers released. Those enemy archers that were right in front were unable to survive this onslaught, all of them turning into white light as the arrows skewered them. The thieves were right behind those archers. The cramped street afforded them no cover, and there was barely any space for them to maneuver, so they suffered the same fate when the next volley of arrows arrived. The mages were the next in line, the bunch that had previously been tossing their spells at Gufei. They had low HP and defense, so they also died in a single salvo. The 3 waves of attack each eliminated the 3 main damage-dealing job classes of the gang, and the next group that followed after were the warriors. Guardians. Get Guardians. That gang leader finally reacted after watching waves of his men die to the archer fire. The Guardians held their shields and came rushing out, easily blocking the archer's attack. Disperse, quick disperse yourselves. It would be far too foolish to rush forward into the line of fire at this time. Onwards. Sakura Sakamuni commanded his men to move forward. It was now time for these archers to shine. Everyone had their bows raised, acting as if they were Special Agent 007. Now it's time for me to shine. Fireball leapt to his feet as he joined his comrades. The enemy this time round were the warriors with high physical defense. Logically speaking, it was time for a mage like him to go nuts. Scram! In the end, the physically weak Fireball was once more shoved out of the group by the archers. Fireball was incensed. He had no idea when Goofy ended up next to him when he turned round. The man was munching on an apple with his left hand as his right rummaged through his dimensional pocket and produced a mage's robe, before lifting that as well as his moonlit nightfalls right next to Fireball. Here, I'll let you have a taste of supremacy. Fireball was a little stunned when he took it from Goofy's hand. He started taking short breaths after he examined the stats of the 2 items. He quickly replaced his own robes with the Midnight Spirit robe and directly tossed his magic staff to the side. He raised Moonlit Nightfalls up in the air and pointed it at the opposing formation. Descending Wheel of Flames, descend. A fiery glow appeared from thin air high up in the sky as Fireball chanted this, and it abruptly made its descent. The street was silent in that instant as the center of the enemy's formation was gouged out by a huge swath of white light. Fireball was a conventional mage, focusing primarily on the intelligence stat. He often used his AO spell when grinding, so his proficiency was far higher than that of Goofy. Now that he was wearing the Midnight Spirit robe and had Moonlit Nightfalls equipped as his weapon, the spell damage that he dished out was far stronger than Goofy could muster. While Goofy could only insta-kill the job classes with lower HP with his AO spell, Fireball was able to reduce the warriors into dust now that he had those 2 op items equipped. Of course, this was not an absolute. There were still some that had managed to survive, but Fireball had also cast a blazing 3 of 1,000 infernos right after, which was why everything had become quiet. As expected of the insta-kill mage, those lucky members from that gang of robbers that survived stuttered after witnessing this sight. Their leader had just lost his life under the oppressive power of those 2 spells as well. The archers from Forever in Flowers were all surprised by this indomitable display of power that had cleansed the battlefield so thoroughly. Even the toughest and most resilient warrior could not survive that one attack. Huh? Everybody subconsciously wondered just what would happen if such a spell were to land on themselves, and their hearts instantly palpitated rapidly. They had all forgotten to continue firing their arrows as they turned back in unison. Behind them was a mage decked out in a fine black robe, with his head lowered. The sword in his hand was placed in a pose that kept him veiled. Upon taking in the atmosphere that had pervaded, that mage slowly raised his head and flashed a sly smile. That wasn't too bad. Dead silence. The crisp sound of a man biting off an apple interrupted this. Goofy continuing to munch on his apple as he said to Fireball, "Alright, that's enough heroics out of you. Return me my gear." Fuck. Everybody finally realized what was going on as they surrounded Fireball to beat him up. Chapter 416, Gold Coin Letter. The sword, Moonlit Nightfalls and the Midnight Spirit robe was returned to Goofy under a round of beratement from the crowd. Everybody was very unhappy to see Fireball act so superior. If he acted so cool, all the ladies would flock to him, and the rest would have no one left. Even though there was no other woman aside from vast lushness around, the fact was that these skeevy men lived to chase skirts. Even if there were no ladies in the streets, they still existed in their hearts. Nobody seemed to care about that gang of robbers any longer, and they did not dare to harbor any sort of ill intent anymore, hurrying to escape with their lives. Just as they were about to leave the other end of the street, bouts of surprised cries were heard. Goofy and the other men turned their attention back and saw the remaining survivors of that gang being sent flying about. Soon, the whole bunch of them were scattered all over, as a single fighter could be seen dishing out punches and kicks all over the place. Those survivors did not really care for any sort of unity either, each escaping in whatever direction they could. Eternal Dominion did not bother to chase them, as he glanced down the street and made his way over. "He's friendly," Gu Fei hurriedly called out when he saw that some of the archers appeared to have the intention to fire. The archers all lowered their bows and watched as Eternal Dominion came jogging over, asking Gu Fei, "Where's Southern Lone Blade?" "He escaped," Gu Fei helplessly answered. "Then let's hurry and chase him," Eternal Dominion said. "I've no idea where he went," Gu Fei said as he turned his gaze over to the members of Forever in Flowers, wondering if any of them had any information to this end. "We didn't see him, either." The crowd shook their head. They had rushed over after receiving the final report from their compatriot from before, but they had arrived quite a while after Southern Lone Blade had left, so nobody managed to bump into him. Finding someone in a foreign place was not easy. They were considered quite lucky to have caught sight of him the first time around, but now that they had no idea where Southern Lone Blade had snuck off to, even Gu Fei had no clue what else they could do. It was instead Sakura Zakamuni and his band of brothers that seemed entirely unfazed by this, probably thanks to that unbowed spirit they had tempered from their perseverance when picking up chicks. Gu Fei was already sorry about troubling them any further, but they had already rallied themselves. "Let's go, everyone. Time to search for that guy." "You all right?" Gu Fei asked Eternal Dominion, obviously referring to the incident that had sent him flying over to the other street. "I'm fine," Eternal Dominion said. "It was just that the wall over there was a little high." He was quite embarrassed about the matter. While he had not sustained much damage after being sent flying over to the other street after colliding with that cyclone, he had thought to quickly continue his hunt, but he had not expected for the buildings in the next street to be of a different height. While the 14th Street was filled with single-story houses, the other street had houses with garrets. No matter how skilled Eternal Dominion was, there was no way he could make his way up that high unassisted. He had no choice but to go down the street and come around like a normal citizen. Southern Lone Blade might have gotten away, but at least he was able to vent some of his frustration on the remaining robbers when he got in their way. Those men from Forever in Flowers had already split up looking for Southern Lone Blade during the time those two were talking. Fireball was the only one left that was walking beside Gu Fei. "Drunk bro, where did you get those two equipment from?" Naturally Gu Fei saw no reason to hide the fact. Actually, they were all just strolling around casually while they searched for their target, so the three of them continued to walk about as Gu Fei narrated the entire chain quest to Fireball in great detail. "Chain quest, huh?" Fireball was a little defeated when he heard this. This was something that the officials had described as a series of plots that were randomly assembled. The chance for the same two exact chain quests to occur was extremely low, so there was no way Fireball could gain anything from what he had learned. And so, it was Gu Fei's turn to show his concern for Fireball. "How many park points have you gotten?" Fireball took a look and almost gave himself a fright. 18. Fireball was neither worthy nor had the ability to deal with this. Not even in his dreams would he have thought he would have such a close encounter with park value. Gu Fei patted him on his back. "I wish you all the best." "Drunk bro, you've played me yet again." Fireball felt like crying, yet no tears came. Right now, he regretted experiencing that moment of cool. A park value of 18 would take upwards of 36 in-game hours to naturally fall off. As for bounty missions, Fireball was not some top-tier expert, so he did not have even the guts to attempt them. Look for his brothers to lend a hand? Given how wretched those comrades of his were, it was more likely for them to kick him while he was down and add insult to injury, rather than aid him. After thinking through all this, all Fireball could do was look at Gu Fei pitifully. Gu Fei was of course not someone without a sense of justice, so he patted the terrified Fireball on his back and said, "When this matter is settled, I'll make sure to help you clear your points." Fireball was extremely touched by this, barely holding it in him as he leaned in close to Gu Fei. "Then shall I follow you first?" Given Fireball's movement speed, he would just be a burden if he followed Gu Fei. But Gu Fei also knew just how dangerous it was to walk around with 18 park points. Letting Fireball tag along would ensure his safety. Besides, There was still no word about where Southern Lone Blade was. He figured it was better to wait until he received further news before hurrying on. Just as he was thinking about news, young Master Han had just so happened to send a message over the mercenary channel. "Murderer, how are things on your end?" He escaped. Gu Fei was gloomy. It had been quite some time since Gu Fei had discovered Southern Lone Blade, and seeing that Southern Lone Blade had yet to spawn in the warriors' encampment, young Master Han reckoned Gu Fei must have failed to succeed, but it was far more shocking to find out that Gu Fei had slipped up than him succeeding. So young Master Han hurriedly asked, "What happened?" "Another gang of robbers that appeared. I can't tell if they were Southern Lone Blade's comrades, but their sudden intervention messed things up." "Oh, so what are you doing right now?" "Continuing the search," Gu Fei replied. "Then I'll leave you to it." Young Master Han ended their conversation. The others from young Master's elites were naturally able to read their conversation, and they were all amazed that Gu Fei had actually failed at slaying Southern Lone Blade. Royal God Call came running out of the position he had taken up and glanced at young Master Han. "How long are we gonna be here?" Young Master Han ignored him, glancing at the time as he muttered, "Further assist." Just as he uttered the name, a familiar figure came walking out from a cluster of white light from within the warriors' encampment. "You're finally back." Young Master Han quickly added, "Brother assist," however, did not reply or greet him, as he quickly took his booklet of information out from his dimensional pocket and began writing at a furious speed while standing there. The four of them seemed to know what he was doing, and none of them went forward to disturb the man. By the time Brother Assist was done, he let out a big sigh of relief and stowed the quill he had. He skimmed through his little booklet before smiling at the four men before him. "I think it should be all that." Brother Assist had logged off to collect information, but the information that he had gathered in reality was naturally unable to be transferred into the game. He could only memorize it as best as he could and enter the game while it was still fresh in his mind, then jot it all down in his booklet. "Did you get everything?" Young Master Han asked. "Yup." Brother Assist nodded happily. This was his moment. He raised the booklet in his hand right in front to the rest of his mercenaries, waving it as he said, "The general information about the top 20 guilds in Linshui City are all here." "Whoa, you memorized the information about 20 guilds?" "Brother Assist, you're a genius." Royal God Call praised Brother Assist's success. "Oh, it was nothing." Brother Assist quickly became modest. "Tell me the names of each guild leader," young Master Han said. Brother Assist read it all out once, as young Master Han quickly tested each and every one. He barked fittingly once he was done. Not a single one of them granted access to their friends list. Everybody shrugged. It took an expert to be able to establish a guild in a city, so naturally they would not leave their friends lists open for access so casually, otherwise there would have been tons of noobs adding them, begging for money or to be carried, or something. "Let's head to the mailbox." Young Master Han waved everybody onward. "Get ready." Nobody had any idea why young Master Han needed so much information when he asked for it. This sort of information could usually be gathered by just randomly asking people on the street, but the amount that young Master Han had required was huge. The average player would at most be able to give a simple summary of the top 2 or 3 guilds in the city, so how many could actually remember upwards of 20 guilds? Sword Demon suggested they head over to the local hall of mercenaries to find out, but heading over to the building itself took time. Brother Assist decided to just log off and gather it from the forums instead. After all, they were at a designated log-off zone, so it was rather convenient to be able to log in and out like that. Brother Assist was already extremely efficient, seeing how he was able to gather information about 20 guilds in such a short time. When young Master Han was unable to add any of these guild leaders as a friend and wanted to head to the mailbox, everyone wondered just what could he be planning that would require him to communicate with all 20 of them. Arriving right by the mailbox, young Master Han hastily wrote down a letter and casually passed it to the person beside him. "Copy." The four came forward and read it, immediately exclaiming, "Whoa, that's so vicious. How are they gonna survive?" The contents of the letter informed the 20 guilds that the priest from Southern Lone Blade Squad, who were currently in Linshui City, was in possession of a sort of resurrection skill. But more importantly, Young Master Han informed them that the Blue Umbra Guild was currently looking to obtain this particular equipment. If the first part of this message was not enticing enough, the final portion of the letter would essentially cut right into the tendon of each guild. The power of any guild was sure to increase upon acquiring such a top-tier piece of equipment. While none of the guilds had the ill intention of stealing another player's equipment, none of these guilds would be willing to let their competitors become stronger now that it was possible for such an item to fall into a competitor's hands. They essentially had no choice but to prevent this from happening. After such a fashion, the crux of the matter still resided on the acquisition of that particular staff. Are you trying to eliminate all the members from the guilds in Linshui City? Everybody blurted out in shock after they read what young Master Han had written. I have no idea how the guilds will turn out, but it would truly be a travesty of heavenly proportions if Southern Lone Blade and his men survive this. Young Master Han smiled warmly. With that, he hurried everybody present. All of you, copy a few more. I'm not only sending this news to the guild leaders themselves, but the core members of each guild, as well. The document was incomparable to a direct message, so few would come running to their mailbox immediately once they got the system prompt. Young Master Han had already come prepared for this, which was why he had asked Brother Assist to gather so much information about the guilds. If they only sent it to 2 guilds, there was no guarantee they might do the deed. But now that they had a total of 20 guilds, as well as the top 10 core members of each guild receiving the message, young Master Han refused to believe that not one of them would be near a mailbox to check on the letter. Furthermore, he had stuffed a single gold coin into each of the letters. The fact that an item was inside the letter would be mentioned in the system prompt upon mail arrival, and better yet was how it would mention the presence of the currency in the letter. But it would not tell them how much was in it. Chapter 417, Search Teams Throughout the City. So what are we gonna do now? Royal God Call asked once young Master Han finished sending all the letters out. Time to watch the show, young Master Han said. Just as he said this, they watched a player exit a system-operated store and hurriedly make his way over to the mailbox. The 5 let him pass as the man opened the mailbox and retrieved his letter from within. He even made an attempt to rifle through the box, but nothing else turned up. Tearing the letter in his hand, a single gold coin immediately fell out. That man was stunned for quite a while before he cursed, "Fuck." He bent down, picked up the gold coin, and took out the letter to read. The 5 exchanged glances with one another, thinking how coincidental it was that they would get to watch someone receive their letter live. This person casually glanced at the letter for a moment or two before his expression changed. He dashed back to the store he had been in just now and came out with another 2 people in tow. The letter was already in their hands, and they were looking at the few sentences written on it with a deathly pallor. Who sent this? The 2 asked the other man who had retrieved the letter. I don't know, it was anonymously sent. The game's mailing system allowed for players to send mail anonymously, but such a method meant the sender would not be able to receive any reply, since a reply would require a player's IGN to send it to the right person. Inform the guild leader. Got it. The man who received the letter stood still and sent out a message, exclaiming before long. The guild leader said he just received a letter with a single gold coin as well. Could it be the same as this? Just who is this guy? I don't know, but let's get some players to watch Blue Umbra's movement. The 3 men said as they departed. The last thing the 5 experts heard from this conversation was the question, how many of our players are in the city? Young Master Han actually froze for a bit when he heard this, before saying, I forgot something. What? They turned to stare at the man. Players can't truly gather whenever they want in this damned city. Those that headed out to sea to grind have to wait for the ferry to get back. There's no way these guilds will be able to raise any substantial amount of manpower now that we had informed all these guilds about this matter, young Master Han said. There's gotta be some, at least. Royal God Call said. There's bound to be a lot less. Young Master Han said. The main activity for players was to grind and acquire loot. Grinding maps were the main areas of activity, so there was not really that many players that would be active in the city. Southern Lone Blade. That rascal could not have intentionally chosen the city to engage in his activities, could he? Young Master Han said. Nope. He first spawned here, Brother Assist said. Southern Lone Blade were old acquaintances, so they had already added each other to their friends lists in the early days of the game. "Oh, then he sure lucked out," young Master Han said. "Then what do we do now?" Royal God Call asked the same question he had asked before. "Wander around the city and check up on the progress of the various guilds in Lin Shui City," young Master Han said. The 7-man squad led by Southern Lone Blade skillfully navigated through the streets after splitting up. The way each conducted this operation was very similar. Each of them had changed their attire and lowered their heads as they walked about, not making eye contact with anyone else. The option to split up is indeed highly effective, as it was not easy to coincidentally bump into someone in such a huge city. Consider just how burnt out both Brave Surge and Phil Herder had ended up trying to locate Gufei. It really showed just how difficult such a task would be. The reason why they were so easily spotted before was entirely because the 7-man squad they had formed was too large a target. Southern Lone Blade was really regretful that he had not thought of this marvelous method in the first place, but thankfully their losses had not been too great, with Fire-Singed Clothes being the only person who had lost his life. However, he wondered how the video mage was faring right now. Southern Lone Blade was actually worried for Gufei. Considering the situation back then, any player would have judged that there was surely no way Gufei could have escaped. Southern Lone Blade was definitely feeling a little sorrow over being unable to take this fat lamb for his own, even going so far as to deliver it into someone else's pockets. He prayed and hoped that Gufei dropped nothing when he died, uncertain just what sort of emotions the man must be feeling right now. Southern Lone Blade had a peaceful trip and successfully made it to Lin Shui City's East Gate. It was not the gate nearest the location they had agreed to meet up in, but he did not have the time or effort to pay attention to the distance. Safety was his top priority as he made his way through the city, and the route he ended up taking led him right towards this gate. The cautious Southern Lone Blade did not rush out immediately. He studied the gate from somewhere nearby and involuntarily moaned to himself. There were already members from Blue Umbra guarding the city gates, carefully checking out the players coming and going. If he wanted to pass off as just another player, Southern Lone Blade had no idea if the enemy was able to recognize him. It would be fine if they had no idea, but there was no way they would let him past easily if they were able to identify him. As a man who had plenty of tricks up his sleeve, Southern Lone Blade was unable to come up with any solution to this for the longest time. Contacting his fellow comrades, he learned that they had all managed to make their way over to the city gates as well, but they were all stuck there. Blackwater was the only one among them who could swagger his way out of the city by activating his stealth, but the rest were out of ideas. "Where are you guys?" Southern Lone Blade asked everyone. "I'm by the South Gate. North Gate. I'm at the West Gate." "Me, too." "You too? Where are you? I can't seem to find you." "Me neither." From this it could be said that the disguises they had chosen was really effective. If even their own comrades were unable to recognize them, what about other strangers? "Let's find a gate to gather at," Southern Lone Blade helplessly called out. "It's too risky making our way through like this." "Which gate?" "We'll head to the one Patty Scent Pastures is at." Patty Scent Pastures was by the West Gate, so the others carefully made their way over. They would break out in cold sweat whenever players from Blue Umbra came running by them in 2s and 3s, but they were never discovered. Southern Lone Blade and the rest were still celebrating over this fact, but he had no idea that his dawdling had only given young Master Han's gold coin Letaploy more time to play out. Out of the 20 guilds from Lin Shui City, 17 of them reacted the first chance they had upon receiving the letter. The ones retrieving the letter were either the guild leaders themselves or a core member of the guild. No matter who it was, the information would be spread in every case. From the 17 guilds, 6 of them were more casual and were not particularly motivated by greed or desire for the staff. These guilds laughed the matter off and ignored the letter, but the remaining 11 guilds attached great importance to it. Just like the scene young Master Han and the others had witnessed by the mailbox, all of them immediately gathered what manpower they had to begin investigating this matter. There were hundreds of players in Blue Umbra. Some were running all around the city, others were standing guard by the city gates, while yet others positioned themselves by the designated log-off points. There was an express emphasis on the Priest Academy, which was easily noted by anyone looking into this matter. Hence, the various guilds were able to verify the information in the letter. Even though they still had their doubts as to the origin of the letter, they immediately sent a call to arms to the players that were grinding out in the various islands. It would take time for them to hitch the ferry back, which was the time Southern Lone Blade and his squad gave them as they traveled about in the city. While the players outside tried their best to hurry back to the city, these guilds were also gathering as much information as they could about Southern Lone Blade and his men. Having more people naturally meant there would be more available manpower, so if the members of Blue Umbra were originally unable to identify the 7 men in the squad, the wide net cast by the various guilds was finally able to get a full picture of the 7 from the bits and pieces of information gathered, even though none of them collaborated on the matter. Each of the guilds leveraged their advantages. Those who knew Fire-Singed Clothes led teams searching for that mug of his, while those that recognized Paddy Scent Pastures searched for him, etc. The task was split up and the search teams in the city quickly increased in number. The squad of 7 could sense this subtle change. Southern Lone Blade promptly reminded the rest, the information must have been propagated by now. Be extra careful, everyone. Fucking hell, how did things escalate so quickly? I don't know. Southern Lone Blade could not make sense of the matter. According to the thought process he had as a professional larcenist, there was no reason Blue Umbra would leak such information willingly, so it had to be the result of those normal players that happened to witness the scene back by the beachside bar, but there was no way they could spread the news so quickly. Obviously, Southern Lone Blade could not have guessed that young Masters elites would be taking the lead on this matter. If the 7 of them were able to notice this change, it was only natural that the guild leader of Blue Umbra, Tanzanite Shade, would realize it as well. Why would this news spread so quickly? That was the same thought that came to his mind. Seeing 3 search teams from 3 different guilds in rapid succession, as well as the tacit expression the leader had tossed at him when they crossed paths, Tanzanite Shade was certain that these opposing guilds were sure to have the same goal as he did. Hey, what's going on over there? Tanzanite Shade contacted the player in charge of guarding the Priest Academy. That was the main battlefield he had previously predicted. A lot of players suddenly emerged out of nowhere, hailing from different guilds. That player wiped the sweat off his brow as he replied. In truth, the situation over there was a little tense. They were running out of places to stand even as the number of guilds that positioned players increased. Nobody said a word on the surface, but the animosity coming off from one another had scared plenty of the players that had just logged on. They were at a loss as to what was happening, causing them to hastily log off in response. Fuck, those guys are real treacherous. Tanzanite Shade was nationally aware that gathering manpower in Linshui City was by no means a whimsical matter. These guilds were currently worried they might not have enough people and so were all gathered by the Priest Academy, probably intending to take advantage of the situation. What now? The player by the Priest Academy was equally helpless. Hold on, I'm coming over, Tanzanite Shade sighed. Now that there were so many guilds having their eye on the staff, fighting over the matter was no solution, either. It seemed like they need to touch bases and discuss this matter. Back over by Goofy's side, the players from Forever in Flowers totally did not recognize a single player from Southern Lone Blade's 7-man squad. Now that the 7 of them were split up and moving by themselves, there was no way the hunters would be able to identify any of the 7 even if they were standing right before them, so naturally nothing turned up in their search. Instead, it was all the movement in Linshui City that had grabbed their attention. Goofy, Eternal Dominion, and a few other members of Forever in Flowers just happened to be near the Priest Academy. Even Goofy's blood began to boil when he saw this scene, wondering, it looks as if they are trying to kill someone. Could a priest really attract hate from so many people? Eternal Dominion was surprised at what he saw. It was truly quite difficult for the priest job class to get into such trouble. Hey, of course they can, Goofy laughed knowingly. Hey, what are you laughing at? Vast Lushness was dissatisfied. I didn't mean you. Goofy was nervous. It turned out that there was a priest standing near him that could have drawn such great ire from the people. But the particular priest Goofy was thinking about was really not Vast Lushness. These guys don't seem to be from the same guild. With so many of them standing guard here, it's like they are waiting to kill a boss. Sakura Sakamuni said. Chapter 418, Just who is the target? I think they're really waiting to kill a boss. Vastlushness suddenly said. Eh? They looked at her quizzically. It's obvious that someone by the beachside bar has spread the news about the resurrection matter, and these people are those that came to ask for advice, Vastlushness said. Oh. Vastlushness may have said it euphemistically, but everybody were quickly able to read between the lines. Gufei flashed a thumbs up to her, spoken like someone who was a seasoned veteran. Eternal Dominion and Gufei did not say another word. Sakurazaka Muni and Fireball were also veteran gamers, but they were not as quick to react to this line as Vastlushness. Just what do you mean by that? Vastlushness glared at Gufei. Nothing. Just stating the facts. Gufei said. Vastlushness had no rebuttal to that, since it was indeed the truth. Back in her glory days with past deeds in Y City, if they were to chance upon a priest that had this ability to resurrect players, she believed she would have led her men over in an effort to learn more from that player. Except Past Deeds was the dominant guild when she was at her most glorious, nobody would dare to step forward and challenge them, so there would not be a scene like this, where so many guilds would gather outside the Priest Academy to vie for the chance. Vastlushness tried to count them, but was unable to get a good number. All she knew was that there was already 6 or 7 guilds waiting out here. This setting also looked somewhat familiar to her. Vastlushness was slightly startled for a moment, not knowing if she should cry or laugh when she finally recalled the reason. There were not so many competing forces back when she would barricade people and loot them of their dropped equipment, but when she was being hunted after falling from grace, this was exactly the same scene that she saw when she was the one stuck in the Priest Academy. Countless guilds would squat outside the academy, waiting to slay her. Back then, she did not feel maligned, as she stubbornly refused to yield and fought to the bitter end, but now that she was aware of just how indecorous and immoral Silver Moon really was, all she could feel was a pained sourness in her heart when she reminisced about her past. There's so many people around here, just where is that priest? Gufei muttered. Vastlushness snapped back to reality and responded, he's probably still out there. I reckon there are people searching the whole city for him. They are sure to send him over the moment he's spotted. Gufei pondered for a while before he said, their intentions are pretty obvious now. There's no way Southern Lone Blade and his men would be unaware of this, so would that priest still be carrying that staff? There's also men stationed over by the warehouse. Vastlushness answered. She had already noticed these things, because these were the steps that she had once ordered her own men to take, so she was very familiar with the process. The warehouse? Oh, I don't mean there. What I mean is that since everyone is now camping out by the Priest Academy, wouldn't they just pass that equipment over to someone else? Gufei said. Give it to someone else? Everybody was stunned. It was apparent to a veteran gamer that they would never accept this as a viable solution. The trust between players in MMOs was almost non-existent. Handing over such a valuable piece of equipment to someone else for safekeeping was as good as a right to sever the friendship and go incognito. What? Is there a problem doing that? It was clear that Gufei, who had lent Fireball 2 of his top-tier items so that he could revel in a moment of superiority, did not see this as a crisis of confidence like the average player. Drunk bro. Fireball had a look of pain, looking as if he pitied the people of the world. Not everyone out there would have as high moral values like I do and would return you your top-tier equipment without even hesitating for a moment after use. Had you given it to anyone else, like Mooney for example, that man would have taken it and ran off with it. Fuck, why would I do that? Sakurazaka Muni was outraged at this slanderous claim. It's not like they are Hunter's equipment. He added. Everyone threw a contemptuous stare at him. I still think that this is a possible option they might be willing to do, Gufei concluded earnestly. His experience fighting with the 7 men had led him to believe that even though they were a squad that dealt in such a shameful business, the bond that they shared was not false. Besides, they were a bunch that carried out larceny together. They could be considered a business organization, and that staff of resurrection could be seen as the squad's collective asset. It just so happened that the priest had to be the one using it, which was why moving it around at this point would be deemed appropriate. Quite a few agreed with this after hearing Gufei's analysis, with Vastlushness taking it a step further. Now that there are even more people searching for them, yet we're still unable to catch a glimpse of them, I do believe they must have split up and are now acting individually. Then who would have that staff? Fireball asked. The thief, perhaps? Goofy suggested. They nodded in agreement once more. Thieves had access to the stealth skill, so they would surely be the ones to have the easiest time evading a hunt. He would be the safest choice if they were to leave something valuable with someone out of the 7. Man, a stealth thief is far more difficult to locate. Sakura Sakamuni revealed a troubled expression. They already barely recognized the 7 as they were, much less someone who could be perpetually invisible. There's no need to find the man, as long as we can guess what his next action will be. Goofy said. Vastlushness stared at the crowd of players loitering outside the Priest Academy. Given how the chips have fallen, there's no way they would continue to stay in Linshui City and wait this out. I'm positive they must be devising a way to leave the city. But you can't just leave the city as and when you like. Everybody has to take a ship at the end of the day. However, they aren't able to sell out on the ferry available by the harbor. Considering that it just so happens to be a place where the various large guilds have claimed, the only option they have left is to make their own, Goofy said, and turned to look at Vastlushness. They had had experience taking such a watercraft before. In that case, Vastlushness was now speaking to Sakura Sakamuni. Send men out of the city and walk along the shoreline. Search through everything and don't leave anything like bushes or mounds of hay or stack of straw or anything that could be used to conceal stuff beneath unturned. A boat could be hidden beneath it. Send over the coordinates the moment a boat is found. Yes, got it. Sakura Sakamuni nodded rapidly. Tell everyone to be careful, as well. Be on guard for a stealth thief. Goofy added. Understood. Sakura Sakamuni had been listening all this while and had already comprehended the crux of the matter. He immediately sent out a message to all the men in his mercenary group and had them to head to the shore to look for boats. Places that could be used to conceal? The men from Forever in Flowers once more showed off their lewd mindset. What if we discover a pair of lovebirds underneath it? Whoa, that's totally possible. How stimulating. That is very stimulating. Let's go. The troops were instantly all motivated. Sakura Sakamuni nodded reassuringly and said, the guys have left. That was when Eternal Dominion, who had not said a word this whole time, poked Goofy. Oi, our target seems to be Southern Lone Blade and not that Staff of Resurrection, right? The other 3 shifted their gaze over to Goofy, thinking that he must have been motivated by greed as well. But Goofy was calm when he replied, who said I'm targeting that staff? This is a possible escape route that Southern Lone Blade might use. If we locate the boat, that's as good as locating Southern Lone Blade. Oh, so that's how it is? Eternal Dominion nodded. But that equipment does sound like it's worth a lot of money. It might be convenient for us to try and loot it off them. Are you thinking of robbing them for it? That's not a good idea. Goofy was tense when he heard this. Stealing from the larcenists, wasn't that the idea that you suggested to me from the very beginning? Eternal Dominion said. Is that so? Goofy recalled, and found it to be true. At the start, he did propose to Eternal Dominion that he should steal from the larcenists. It was only later when Brother Assist and the others had judged that the larcenists themselves might not have anything valuable on them, that the 2 men abandoned that proposal. Looking at it now, it seemed like there was something worthwhile on Southern Lone Blade and his squad. After all, if that's the case, we'll take that item for ourselves, if it's convenient. Goofy decided. We'll need to leave some men by the Thieves' Union, then. Vastlushness said. Why don't you go? Goofy said to Eternal Dominion. Only the 2 of them were able to guard that spawn point, since they were the only 2 that could sense the presence of a stealth thief. That works for me. Eternal Dominion nodded happily. Then, shall we head out of the city and search for the boat? Goofy said to the other 3. They nodded agreement. Eternal Dominion headed over to the Thieves' Union by himself to lay in wait, while Goofy and the 3 headed out of the city. Along the way, Goofy sent a message to the others in Young Master's elites. What are you guys up to? Inspecting people's work, Young Master Han replied. The 5 were currently wandering about the city, spotting the search teams that were running everywhere from time to time. They were all very happy seeing that their efforts were not wasted. Their group's activity had actually attracted quite a lot of suspicion upon themselves, yet nobody tried to attack them, since they were all positive it could not be the 5 of them. Look, there's 5 players right there, and their job classes match. Is that them? The first one to spot them would always say some variation of this line. The second would conclude after closer examination, no, they should all be men. There shouldn't be a lady among them. Oh. Everybody was put at ease when they caught sight of young Master Han. But of course, this entire exchange would happen secretly, without the 5 members of young Master's elites even realizing it. They walked and walked, making their way over to the Priest Academy. The numbers present now were far greater than Gu Fei and the others had seen when they were there. Blue Umbra's guild leader, Tanzanite Shade, was now on site, and was having a terse discussion with the leaders of the other guilds that had hurried over. In their eyes, Southern Lone Blade and his gang were already a dish of fatty meat that had been served to their table. They were bound to be eaten, but the only question was how many chopsticks were there, and who would be able to grab a piece. Fight it out in an unruly fashion and leave it on a first come, first served basis? That method was actually somewhat unfair, since the problem was that the priest himself might not be dead, but those that were near him would already be killed off. That was not an outcome anyone would be glad to see. Fortunately, the leaders were now all present, and they had all agreed to discuss and settle this in a peaceful manner. Young Master Han laughed coldly when he saw this bunch of players hoping for the death of the others around them, yet having to gather together and discuss the issue civilly. "What's the matter?" everybody asked. Those who were familiar with young Master Han knew that even though he was a man with profound schemes, he was not the sort with ice in his veins. But the moment he smiled warmly, that meant somebody out there was truly out of luck. That cold laugh meant that someone had made a mistake, and he was now laughing at their idiocy. "Let's go." Young Master Han did not have a whit of interest towards anything happening in the Priest Academy as he gathered the mercenaries to leave. "Where to?" they asked. "We're gonna take a walk out of the city," young Master Han said. "What's there to see there?" They were all nonplussed. Now that Lin Shui City has been stirred into such a state, would Southern Lone Blade and his gang be able to stay here any longer? They must be thinking of ways to leave the city. Young Master Han told them. But are they even able to leave? They had walked past the city gate while they were making their rounds in the city, and now that the players that had been out grinding were making their way back, the amount of people guarding these various gates had increased tremendously. "One of them would have made it out," young Master Han said. "Who?" "The thief." Chapter 419, Using 2 peaches to kill 3 warriors. Superscript 1. The west gate of Lin Shui City. Southern Lone Blade had finally arrived safely after making the scary yet uneventful journey. "Are we all here?" he asked the rest via the mercenary channel. "Yup." The other 5 reported in. Southern Lone Blade was currently positioned in a small alley and had not left it. He peeked out from it, only to find his comrade Glue had pretended to set up a stall right by the market that had sprung up on the street. Glue often set up his stall to hawk his goods by the city gates, so he was leveraging one of his skills, pretending to go through the motions without raising anyone's suspicions. As for the other 4, Southern Lone Blade had carefully observed his surroundings and could not spot them in the crowd. He was very pleased with this. If even he was unable to identify them, he doubted the strangers that were after them could. "Southern, what now? Do we rush out?" The one asking was Fire-Singed Clothes. "That's a little troublesome. There looks to be plenty of players lingering by the gate." Patty Scent Pastures spoke up. Southern Lone Blade had also quickly realized that problem. Compared when he was over at the East Gate, the amount of men guarding each gate had increased since he had made the mistake of getting the squad together. Southern Lone Blade was originally confident that he could muster his squad, make a push and kill off the guards in one fell swoop, so that at least they would be unaware the direction the group would be taking thereafter. But now that the number of people they had to face had increased so dramatically, forget about killing them all off. They might have troubles even fighting their way out in one piece. The mercenary channel was silent. "Let's do this instead," Glue spoke up. "I'll draw their attention. They are sure to use this opportunity to chase after me. It's best if I do that instead. As a priest, I'm sure to draw all their attention," Patty Scent Pastures said. Everybody was silent. What Patty Scent Pastures had said was true. There was no way Glue could get all their attention if he was the one doing this. Only the appearance of a priest would do, but the problem was that Glue had the movement speed to get away from the enemy since he was an archer. If a priest exposed himself like this, death was the only outcome. "I'll be going, then." No one else had spoken up, So Paddy St. Pastures had made up his mind. Just as he was about to reveal himself, Southern Lone Blade suddenly sent out a message, "No one go." What? Paddy St. Pastures was perplexed. Southern Lone Blade was never the sort to have such emotional impulses. "There's no use getting you to draw their attention. You'll be killed the moment you step into view. How far can you even run?" Southern Lone Blade said. Paddy St. Pastures thought what he said made sense. How could he even draw the enemy away when he had no movement speed to begin with? They would probably finish him off the moment he took no more than 2 steps. "So what do we do?" someone else asked. "Here's what I think." Southern Lone Blade already had a plan in mind. "That's a great idea." Everybody cried out in unison. By the time they heard it all, members from more than 10 guilds were gathered beneath the west gate. All of them had a well-balanced team composition, taking what they believed to be the best position under the gate. Tension was in the air as these players glared at one another with palpable anger. They were waiting for their guild leaders to conclude their discussion. If no accord could be reached, the place would turn into a battlefield in an instant. Currently, each team had their weapons at the ready, already making preparations as to what they should be doing the moment battle ensued. But at the same time, none of them had forgotten the true purpose of their presence here, to keep an eye on the players leaving the city. Anybody could have cut through the tension with a knife, their palms sweaty as each player gripped their weapon. Suddenly, everybody saw a panicking priest dashing down the street nearest to the gate. The eyes of the players beneath the gate from the various guilds shone. "Is that the guy?" This slight hesitation flashed through their minds even as they saw an arrow streak through the air out from the very alley that priest had run out of, hitting the man squarely on his shoulder. The players standing by that gate immediately reacted and hurried closer to that priest at the same time. The priest did not halt, continuing his way onward in an attempt to escape. Unfortunately, a stream of repeating fireballs was trailing behind him, exploding upon his back while a single homing projectile came flying over. White light consumed the priest, but amid the glow, the faint outline of an item fell out. Clattering to the ground, an item dropped. By the time the light subsided, everybody looked intently and saw that it was a magic staff. Almost at the same time, an archer was already sprinting down the alley. The moment he saw those players standing by the gate witnessing this scene, the man anxiously dashed for that magic staff. But right behind him was a warrior that came dashing afterwards aggressively, activating a charge that struck this archer right at his waist, knocking him far away. The warrior wanted to pick up the staff, but unfortunately, his movement was just too slow. The players from the various guilds under the gate had already reacted. Shouts rang out as the spells from the mages, arrows from the archers, all came flying out towards that magic staff. With that item at the heart of everything, the AO spells burned even as the arrows peppered down on that warrior. No longer able to take even half a step forward, that warrior hid himself in the safety of the alley in his panic once more. "Quick, the magic staff!" No one knew who cried that out. The members from the various guilds all darted over recklessly as one of the player with a superior movement speed broke away from the mob. But before they could get within meters of that item, flames came crashing down from the sky and burned the eager player into cinders. Everybody came to a stop. Anybody who dared to get near the magic staff would instantly become public enemy number 1. Everybody came to that realization thanks to that player's death moments ago. The players that were present all glanced at one another. That magic staff was still lying on the ground a short distance away from everyone, but no one dared to take a step forward and retrieve it. They were all discussing this matter privately in their own respective channels, with some even informing their guild leaders of what just happened. The situation over by the Priest Academy was already in a huge mess. The guild leaders were still attempting to discuss that matter and had hardly been able to come to a consensus when they saw a priest revive. Before any of them could get any further details, that priest was already swathed in a white light and had logged off. Everybody stared fixedly as the report from the west gate came in, that priest dropped a magic staff upon his death. The moment everybody heard this, they saw no need to discuss the matter any further. They immediately led their members towards the west gate as they were filled in on the details of the situation over there. "The staff is on the ground. No one dares to touch it." The state of affairs was not terrible, but there was no way it would remain so since the system would remove items that were dropped on the ground after 5 minutes. Even the player with the fastest movement speed would not be able to reach the east gate in 5 minutes, That meant that someone must pick up that magic staff before the leaders arrived, otherwise the whole situation would be for naught. The various guild leaders were currently mulling over the situation quickly as they each made sure to remind their underlings, do your best to grab that staff. Even if they fail to do so, they need to ensure they have a good look who picked it up, as well as their job class. At the same time, the troops left at the various spawn points were all instructed to remain vigilant. The atmosphere by the west gate by now was at its peak. It had been 30 seconds since the staff had dropped. Nobody looked to be moving, but the front row of players closest to the staff had already slowly been making imperceptible shifts towards it. Everybody wanted to enter the area where a player could grab hold of the item with a swift reach of their arm. They would still come out on top, even if they died the moment they did this. Unless their luck was literally in the pits, it was unlikely that this one death would dislodge the item from their possession. A minute passed, and the intentions of the players had already been exposed. They had all shrank the distance between the staff and themselves by an entire step, which was easily a change that even the naked eye could tell. The players behind this front row were perturbed. Those players in the front row were now a whole step away, unbeknownst to them. When they finally realized what happened, these players could not help but marvel about the frightfulness of the saying, "Many a little makes a mickle." Someone in the front row suddenly bolted out. In truth, not everybody shared the same distance from the magic staff, since they had lined themselves up in a row. Some were a little closer, while others further, and the man that bolted out right now was actually the closest to the staff. He was but 2 steps, or 1 giant stride away from the item. The man finally could no longer restrain himself and made the first move to snatch it. He was fast, but someone else was faster. He might be the nearest to the staff, but there were others closer to the player than he was to the staff. The 2 players beside this man cooperated the moment they saw that man bolt out like that and immediate made to kill him on the spot. But someone in this pair was even more scheming, for he capitalized on this opportunity to attack and cleverly shifted himself forward, hoping to casually pick up the staff after completing the attack. Almost at once, players who had their eyes on this man acted too. The status quo was already on the cusp of breaking, so what more when there were 2 incidents of blatant provocations like this? With the 2 incidents resolved back to back in such a fashion, the gauntlet was thrown and everybody came out swinging, making an attempt to grab the staff even as they got rid of the people near them. Chaos reigned as the players used all sort of methods to better bolster their chances. Someone was about to pick up the staff in the mess and the people nearby saw they were unable to stop him. They would quickly thrust their leg out and kick the magic staff away. With all the feet in the way, the staff would not roll too far away, but the player who made the mistake of trying to pick up the staff would instantly die as he was lost in the chaos. The second who tried to take advantage of the situation had just bent over when someone planted a heavy kick into his behind. The man lost his balance and fell to the ground, but even then he was still reaching out with his arm to grab a hold of the staff. In the end, he was trampled to death. Everyone finally realized that attempting to bend over and grab the staff in this pandemonium was suicide, so no one bothered to make such reckless attempts. Players who dashed towards the staff audaciously stretched their legs over instead, in an attempt to step on the staff with their own feet. It was cramped, as scuffles broke out and spells rained down. Death was everywhere. The players who were not involved watched this scene play out. At this time, Southern Lone Blade brought the rest of his brothers and slowly crept out from that alley, walking towards the west gate. No one noticed their presence, since they were all focused on the magic staff on the ground. But the entire incident had actually been orchestrated by Southern Lone Blade and his squad. Even the priest they killed was not one of their own, but a low-level noob that they had randomly appraised. 50 gold coins and a passable piece of equipment for a priest was all it took to convince that player to act out this scene and sacrifice himself. As for that magic staff, it was just a white tier staff that the noob had tossed out in the instant he was about to die. Anybody could have pulled this off. Southern Lone Blade had already expected these players to have a mistaken first impression about what was happening, and none of them would have suspected it was actually all an act, as all it would take to expose this charade would have been a simple appraisal. Southern Lone Blade was the last to clear the west gate. He turned back and watched as that whole bunch of players continued to fight over that white tier magic staff, leaving with a smug smirk stuck across his face. Chapter notes: 1. a Chinese parable. The gist of the story is rather interesting, and the takeaway from it pertains to the method applied by Southern Lone Blade, using others to achieve their means. You can read a version here. http://media.yourworld.org/interact/ebook/36story/438/english2.htm Chapter 420, Who Took My Magic Staff Over by the Shore near Linshui City. The men from Forever in Flowers were currently picking through the bushes and tall grass. The hunters all moved at incredible speed, and looking for something as big as boat was very easy, so their search efficiency was quite high. Over 30 of them went down the shoreline and worked in a clockwise motion. Soon, someone reported that they discovered a boat over at a set of coordinates. Just the one? Sakura Sakamuni replied. Look carefully. What bullshit. Would I miss it if there were two there? Sakura Sakamuni was not exactly a respected figure despite holding the position of leader of the mercenary group. Guard it, Sakura Sakamuni said. They had specially inquired into how the private boat hire worked in Linshui City as they made their way here, and they confirmed that most of the boats shared the same model. However, this was not because the players were not interested in trying to be unique, but that the average player had no idea how to make a boat in the first place. So these boats were all made by the same shipwright company. This company was actually a mercenary group, and they shared the same name. It was said that the group was formed by players who were all knowledgeable about shipbuilding. They were a group of players from Linshui City that quickly realized it was a great business opportunity, and thus formed the company. As the game developed, their membership grew as well. People had no idea how skilled they were when it came to gaming, but the people who formed this company were fairly well off, since they had a monopoly here in Linshui City when it came to building boats. In shipwright terms, this sort of boat that had a maximum occupancy of 5 players was essentially the current limit that could be made, given the tools and materials available in the game. As such, the private boats that players could own might be smaller than this, but nothing larger was possible. That meant that if Southern Lone Blade and his men intended to leave Linshui City and steer the boat on their own, they would need a total of 2 boats, since one would not be sufficient. This was why Sakura Sakamuni had wanted to confirm if there was only a single boat present when that hunter reported in just now. But even though they knew that Southern Lone Blade and the squad would need 2 boats to leave together, there was no guarantees that they would have hidden both of the boats they intended to use together. Thus, all they could do was leave some men over by the place where they had discovered the boat. In the end, the second, third and fourth message came soon after, and Gufei and the others came to realize that they might not have enough manpower for this plan of theirs. At the moment, the mini-cities in Parallel World each had populations of hundreds of thousands of players. Owning a private boat like this could be seen as a status item in Linshui City. It was something some experts, criminals acting all pompous, or wealthy players would seek to own in order to keep up appearances. It was said that commandeering one of their own little boats out into the water was the highest level of play when it came to courting the ladies. This logic was no different from anyone trying to pick up chicks by flaunting a sports car they privately owned in real life. Mentioning that the boat was borrowed or even rented would be no different from taking the system-operated ferry service, which would very likely reduce their chance of scoring with the ladies. As such, this translated into the reality that the amount of players that owned a private boat was not particularly common or even uncommon. Sakura Sakamuni and the 30-odd men he sent out had quickly realized they were about to be used up if they left someone to keep watch on every boat they had found. At the moment, there was still a huge area around the shore that they had yet to search through. So how are we going to do this? Sakura Sakamuni was worried, gazing over at the 2 people that had come up with this idea, Gufei and Vast Lushness. Gufei thought for a while and said, "Get your guys to keep looking for boats. Perhaps someone would leave some sort of mark or emblem on their own boats. There's no need to guard any of those that is not theirs." "What are the names for Southern Lone Blade and his bunch?" Sakura Sakamuni asked. This question stumped Gufei. He only recognized and knew of Southern Lone Blade alone, so he quickly sought out Brother Assist to get more information. As the expert when it came to information gathering, after identifying that the other members in his squad were the most recent names that had disappeared from the top 10 grade adept list of the job classes, The man immediately copied down the list of names that made up the 10 great adepts before checking up and going through them in greater detail. The members of the 7-man squad were, the warrior Southern Lone Blade, thief Blackwater, mage Fire Singed Clothes, archer Glue, priest Patty Scent Pastures, and the knight unrivaled Lucky Star. The other priest did not make it to the list as one of the 10 great adepts, so his identity was currently unknown. Gufei ended up telling this to Sakura Sakamuni, who was rather dejected after hearing it as well. There's still one we don't know. Oh well, can't be helped. Let's just get the guys to search with this. Sakura Sakamuni passed on the news and the 30-odd hunters got to work once more. Upon closer scrutiny, they found out that indeed plenty of players had carved their own names onto the boats, and those whose names were not any of the 6 were instantly ignored. Unfortunately, only half of the players had actually carved their own names onto the boats. While the remaining half had also made personalized markings on their boats, they had instead drew imprints rather than etched out words. It was impossible to tell them apart, so they would have to remain and keep watch. Nevertheless, they were at least able to free some of these men to continue the search. The players that remained could still try and keep looking as best as they could, as long as they were able to keep the boats they had previously uncovered within their line of sight. Let's hurry up ourselves. Vast Lushness said. Every bit counts. Drunk bro, you can't ignore my plight and ditch me. Fireball cried. There really were players that had picked up his bounty mission and came to hunt after his head as they were making their way around. Thankfully, Gufei was around to come to his rescue, forcing these players into a retreat after a short exchange once they realized they were not up to par. Had Gufei not been around, Fireball would have already found himself locked up in Linshui City's dungeon by now. Just follow me. Gufei said. They had finally made it to the city after chatting all this while, yet they suddenly saw that there were not many guilds holding fort, which left them quite surprised. Looks like Southern Lone Blade has already escaped. We got to act quickly. Gufei said. Fireball saw this transpire, and felt he would be somewhat at fault if he continued to be a burden and slowed down Gufei's movement. Thus, he finally gritted his teeth and said, Drunk bro, you should hurry up and catch up to them. I'll make my way over on my own. Alright, but take care of yourself. The way I see it, why don't you head over to the bar by the beach and get yourself a drink? Bounty hunters would not dare to touch you if you were there. Gufei patted him on his back and nodded to Sakura Sakamuni and Vast Lushness to make their way out of the city at their fastest speed. Drunk bro, you're too much of a realist. Can't you be at least a little bit more courteous with me? Fireball was in tears as he swore in his heart that he would no longer play around with top-tier equipment anymore. In that case, Fireball should leave and get yourself a drink or two. We'll try and do what we can and hurry as best as we can. The other two bade farewell thusly. At such a crucial moment, Sakura Sakamuni at least showed the bearings of a gentleman and did not leave the lady behind as he began searching over to his side with his fastest speed. Vast Lushness had also randomly chosen a side and began slowly making her way over. Gufei went sprinting down the beach right outside the city and found it strange that it was all quiet around him. Since Southern Lone Blade had already left the city, the other guilds should be able to guess his intentions and should be sending players out to station them by the beach as well. Even if they did not have time to set up proper positioning, there should at least be a bit of people around. Take, for example, those people who were assigned to guard the gates. How could their targets vanish so soon after leaving the city gates? Gufei looked to his left and right. There was essentially no one else aside from Sakura Sakamuni and Vast Lushness, who had both just stepped out of the city. Just like him. Gufei obviously had no idea what was happening over by the West Gate, which had already changed the setup of this entire incident. After the intense few minutes of struggle, someone finally found the perfect moment to strike and gotten a hold on that magic staff. Even though he was quickly butchered under the exclamations from the crowd, he was still gratified since he was able to snatch that top-tier staff for his guild. This man was a warrior, so he was still holding on to the staff the moment he respawned in the warrior's encampment. He could not wait to admire the stats of the magic staff he held when he instantly became petrified. His guild leader had already received his happy message about successfully snatching the magic staff from everyone, and had instantly sent a congratulations his way. In the end, he instead received a reply of great anguish. Guild leader, We got tricked. As that player linked the stats of the magic staff to his guild leader. It was an extremely ordinary magic staff, so anybody could instantly understand how they had been duped. This guild leader immediately sent down orders to the guild members: head out of the city and chase after them. Just as he was about to inform the other guild leaders of the situation, he suddenly stopped himself. Why must I tell the rest about this? He suddenly asked himself. The others have no clue that the magic staff was a fake. They may be dissatisfied if they see that my men have gotten hold of the item, so they are sure to be making their way over to the warriors' encampment. Since their attention is conveniently diverted, wouldn't that leave just our guild as the only people who know the real location of the magic staff? Phew. I nearly did something really stupid. That man cleared out the message he had typed out and spoke to the warrior that had sacrificed himself and picked up the staff. Why? The warrior was perplexed. The guild leader did not attempt to hide his thought process and gave him a simple explanation. Props were due for the warrior, who hardly complained, nodding and logging off, all for the sake of the guild. Just like this guild leader expected, the rest of the men from the other guilds had indeed kept note of who the magic staff ended up with despite having not gotten hold of said staff. After reporting accordingly, all the various guilds began to move towards the warriors' encampment, preparing to physically hash it out properly. In the end, before they could even do anything of that sort, their comrades that were barricading the warriors' encampment quickly sent a message. That warrior logged off shortly after he respawned. Goddamn, that was quick. The other guild leaders could feel anger filling up their hearts. No matter how strong someone was, or how much work a guild put in, everybody was equally helpless towards the insurmountable obstacle called logging out. God damn it, guard the warrior encampment for the next 24 hours. Anyone who comes into contact with that man, do not even let a single one of them off. Some leaders had already sent out this order to their men in a fit of rage. As one of the first to begin this operation, Tanzanite Shade was obviously feeling very irate. He made an attempt to reach out to the other leaders of their large guilds and wanted to vent his own frustrations. It's rare that so many of us have nothing to do. Let's head over to my beachside bar and have a drink or two. My treat. Tanzanite Shade sent out an invitation. There were guild leaders who agreed due to their love of venting their emotions through the use of alcohol, and there were some that felt Tanzanite Shade's invitation seemed to have a deeper meaning to things and agreed to the proposal, as well. In the end, not a single one of them rejected his offer. That's great. I'll be waiting for all of you by the bar then. See everyone then. Tanzanite Shade sent out this message and began making his way to the bar. A slight smile hung on the corners of his mouth, entirely different from the anger he had shown in his messages.